In August, I was hiking in Yellowstone National Park. It was a gorgeous day and also very calm as well. A few miles into the trail I was on, I noticed a bit of bush had started shaking just off the trail. I stood there and watched for a bit, thinking that there must be some birds or something in there. After a few seconds of watching though, thinking some neato wildlife could be in there, a large grizzly bear suddenly stepped out from behind that bush and started watching me very intently. As soon as he stepped out from behind it, I started talking to him. I had been singing aloud the entire hike. I was saying things like, "Hey there, Mr. Bear, I'm okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just out for a hike." I was mostly trying to prevent it from being startled and let it know I was not there to cause any harm, although I'm not sure it could entirely understand. I say it was a he because I didn't see any cubs nearby, and he also didn't charge at me and kill me immediately, so he probably was not nearby protecting any cubs. I stood there with my hand placed on my bear spray, talking to this bear until he finally wandered away from the trail, off toward a creek just off the side. I was headed east on the trail now, and after the bear walked off, I decided to keep on hiking and try to forget about that experience. About a mile later though, I started to suddenly get super creeped out. I don't know exactly what it was really, but I just felt the hairs on the back of my neck suddenly stand up. It instantly felt like I was being watched. It was a totally creepy feeling. The wind had started to pick up a bit and was now whistling through the trees. There were noises, creaks and pops, almost everywhere around me. I stopped for a moment and started to take in my surroundings more intently. As I started looking around, I noticed there was a grizzly bear just feet away from me, staring at me from underneath a downed log. At this point, I was sure the bear was following me. I think it was hunting me. I don't know for sure though, because once it saw that I'd noticed it, he just kinda sauntered away. A few miles without thinking, I sat down for lunch. A peanut butter and honey sandwich with beef jerky. At that very moment, I realized I was a fucking moron. I was hiking alone, with bear spray sure, but no one knew where I was, and I knew for a fact the top predator in the area was following me. When I heard another rustling from the bushes again, I immediately packed all my shit up and left my food behind, and headed back for the trailhead. At 15 years old, I was walking home with a friend along a dark street with nothing but woods and a small community center on the left side. There was a school and some football pitches on the right as well. We had passed by the community center already, and the pitches. We were now passing the hill leading to the trees on the left, and the school on the right. The school had a big main building and this bike shed. Growing up, people would go drink there or hang out amongst other places, but you always knew the people who were there, so it was never really an issue. As we walked past on this particular night, we heard some voices. We could make out one of them shouting something along the lines of, "Here we go, guys, come on!" All of a sudden, about 10 people came out of the shed ahead of us and now started charging across the grass to the fence of the school, which was the only thing between them and us. They got to the fence and spread it out to jump over, some right at us, some behind, and some ahead. There was nothing to do but stop. "Where you off to, lads?" said one. "Aye, where you off to? Come on, get us into that party. You must know whose party it is, aye?" Something was always going on in the community center. It was a tiny thing, but it did karate classes, parties. Tonight, it happened to be a party. It seemed we had no choice. They guessed we were local and must know whoever's party it was. They wanted us to go up with them and try to get them in. At this point, one of the group had recognized my friend though, and the mood went from kind of hostile to neutral. Well, this was promising. He knew him, so maybe we were good actually. Fast forward, and the guy guarding the door would not let us in. Surprise, surprise. We were all standing in almost a circle when one of the group walked up and stood near enough in my face. "Who are you and where are you from?" I told him my name and he looked at me, right through me almost. I sensed the atmosphere immediately changed and tried to mumble something about being a nobody to save the confrontation. I don't give a fuck who you are or where you're from. I'm gonna fucking... One of his group jumped in right there. Wow, no, dude, he's cool, man. He's cool, not him. That was when I saw a shimmer of light reflecting off metal in his hand, and my heart sank. He was holding a blade about the size of my adult hand, pointing in against my stomach. He turned to his friend and they started arguing. My friend caught sight of it as well and mouthed for me to go now. He gave me the most haunting face as the fear within me made me wonder if my legs would even be capable of carrying me away from here. Fortunately, my friend was on it. In a stroke of genius, he told them that he had to go to the toilet. He grabbed me and we ran to the corner of the building, which was about 2 meters away. We ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Without even looking back, I could tell instantly the guy with the knife was now chasing us, as I could hear him shouting about how he was going to tear me open. The only thing that saved us from being gutted that night was that we knew the area better than him. We cut through the gardens of the houses up the road. That and his friend seemed to be more steady-headed and had noticed what he was about to do. I found out who this guy was afterward. He's currently serving time for multiple different crimes, including weapon offenses, theft, and drug charges. In case you didn't know, Scotland has a dark culture of idiots who think it's big to carry knives and stab people just because. Back at my old house, we had a very large fenced-in backyard. A large portion of this yard was very heavily wooded as well. I was around 6 years old and out playing in that backyard. I was a very explorative child and decided I would follow the fence all the way back just to see where my yard ended. Before this, I had always been too scared to go back there on my own. But it was around this age that I started to become too curious to be deterred by being scared. I walked out for a while until I finally reached the end of that fence. Where our gate line ended, someone else's began a couple of inches behind it. There was also a swing set a couple feet behind in their yard. I was more focused on, though, what I saw in my yard, which was a very large tree that had these huge nails about 6 inches long, stabbed in all the way to the top. This was just the perfect thing for climbing. As I started going up, though, I heard leaves being stepped on beneath me. I looked down, and in the opposite fenced-off area, I noticed 2 men standing there. They were about 25 to 30 years old, and I saw they were admiring me. Me being little, I just thought they must have thought I was cool with how high I had climbed up in the tree by myself. One man called over to me, "Wow, look at you go!" They stood there and watched me. I noticed there was now a little girl on the playset by their side as well. One of the men called out and asked me if I would like to come over and play with them. They told me they would help me over the fence if I couldn't make it on my own. I climbed down the tree, pondering over this. The other little girl just kind of blankly stared at me, lightly kicking her feet to make her swing go. I told them I would have to ask my mom if it was okay, but they kept on insisting, saying things like, No, it's fine. You're right behind your house after all. You can just play for a couple of minutes, right? But I knew better. I ran off, heading back to my house to ask. I ran to the kitchen, asking my mom if I could play next door on their swing set. She thought about it for a moment, and then said, "Fine," nodding her head towards our other neighbor's house. Now that I'm older, I know that she thought at the time I was asking to go to the other neighbors next door, who she could see from the window and we were all really good friends with. I ran back to the woods when I saw that one of the men was now gone, and so was the little girl. This made me rethink, because I didn't see the other girl now. I told the man I could not play. He reached his hands over the fence and offered to pick me up and lift me. He was acting very fake nice, but I could tell he was being very pushy now. Something in my head immediately started screaming stranger danger. I backed away slowly, and then I ran away, only looking back to see him staring at me as I ran away. After that, I never saw those neighbors again. I also never went back there. I was too scared. I didn't tell my mom about this because I thought I would get in a lot of trouble. A stupid kid thought process, I know. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I had decided to go over to the other side. This one isn't supernatural or too weird at all. It's just sort of a natural part of being out in the woods. I was hunting in the eastern part of Texas a few years back. The area I was hunting in was really dense bottomland that hadn't been logged for at least 70 to 80 years, so we're talking about deep, dense woods. This stuff was a swamp for half the year. The kind you couldn't even really walk through without holding a machete. A typical morning for hunting in this area was to set up a stand in a natural or man-made clearing. I parked my four-wheeler a ways off and walked the last couple hundred yards. Now normally, these woods feel nice and welcoming to me. I'd been hunting this exact stand I was going to since I was probably around 8 years old, with an adult until I was legally allowed to hunt alone at least. I was very familiar with the area, needless to say. There are always birds chirping and squirrels making a racket at all times. Not today though. Once I arrived, I noticed it was dead silent, other than the wind shooting through the trees. The woods were never that quiet, unless it was right after a gunshot. I also noticed that I just couldn't shake this feeling that I was now being watched. I kinda think, whatever, and blew it off and got up into the stand. It was basically a wooden box with openings on all sides on stilts, so it wouldn't get flooded when the river rises up. Although it was oddly quiet today, I sat back and just enjoyed being in the woods. I would usually read while I was in the stand, since you can usually hear something long before you ever see it. I sat there and read for a couple of hours, but I noticed that it was still just this completely abnormal silence around me. I was now a lot uncomfortable, to be frank, but no biggie, right? Finally, the sun goes down, without a single deer, hog, or anything showing up. I get out and head back to my wheeler. While I was walking back was one of the most unnerving experiences of my entire life. The woods are always quietest right after the sun goes down. The day critters are all going to sleep, and the night critters are just waking up, so there isn't much noise, but it was pitch silent. I hauled my ass getting out of there. I went back the next morning and everything was completely back to normal. Squirrels, birds, and bugs making noise all over the place. On my way back to the wheeler, I noticed something I hadn't noticed the day before. Running down the entire side of the trail were tracks, mountain lion tracks. I was stalked by a mountain lion that entire night. It had been a real bad year for the deer, and not a lot of fawns either. It had been a very dry year too, which meant that all the deer were down in the bottom, and not many up on the ridges where mountain lions normally like to hunt. This lion was outside its normal range because prey wasn't exactly abundant compared to normal times. I'd never heard of a mountain lion attacking someone in that area, but I very well may have been the first that day if I stayed any longer. I have a family friend who owns a beautiful and very old house in a wealthy suburb of a large city. She was going on vacation, and her husband was leaving for a business trip, so she asked if I could cat sit for her for that time. I had done it for her plenty of times before, and I adored the house and the area as well, so I readily agreed. The house appeared very small and quaint from the street, but was actually very rambling and had an extremely bizarre layout that never seemed to end. The basement was a walkout with 2 doors and 2 staircases that led to the main floor. The house was honestly so weirdly designed that you would find rooms and hallways and doors you didn't even realize existed, even after days of staying there. I spent most of my time in the front room of this home, which had a very large window facing the street and no curtains. One night, I was studying on the couch in the front room in front of the window. It was so pitch black out that I couldn't see anything outside, even though I was just inches away from that window. Suddenly, I started to feel extremely on edge and uncomfortable, like I was being observed or something. Around 2:30 a.m., I shut off all the lights in the house and retired to a small bedroom in the middle right side of the main floor, which had windows with blinds. I watched a few videos on YouTube, making sure to leave the door open just a crack. The cats like to come in and out throughout the night. I thought I had heard a male voice coming from the basement at one point in time, but I dismissed it as me just being creeped out, being alone in this old, rambling house. Around 3 a.m., I was finally ready to shut everything down and go to bed. For the first time in hours, the house was completely silent. I was no longer reciting information to myself during study or watching any loud videos. That silence, however, was fleeting. It was very quickly broken by what sounded like a very large man loudly stomping up the stairs from the basement. Thus began the most terrifying experience of my entire life, during which I was certain my life was going to end. This person was obviously not trying to creep around or be subtle or waste any time with those kinds of things. They made no attempt to hide the sound of their steps. In fact, it was the opposite. They were very deliberately and loudly clomping their way up the staircase, like they were supposed to be in this house at 3 a.m. Because of this, at first I thought perhaps the owner's husband had come home from his business trip early, and didn't realize I was there watching the house. I called out, "Hello?" in a harsh, questioning way to indicate I was not expecting anyone to be there. I was hoping it was the husband, and he would respond back, perhaps confused or apologetic for scaring me. Instead, though, there was dead silence. My voice rang out, and the steps immediately stopped. No words were spoken. I knew immediately something was wrong. I got up from the bed and stared at the crack in the door, waiting for anything to happen. Then, the timid female cat bolted into the room, meowing like crazy and winding around my legs, very distressed. This cat was so timid that she would run away from me at the slightest noise or movement, but now she was so spooked that she was running towards me for comfort. I knew then that whoever this was not someone this cat was familiar with, and therefore no one who had any business being in that house. I went to the bed and picked up my cell phone and called 911. I then picked up an iron, closed the bedroom door, and leaned heavily against it. This room had no lock, so I just had to hope they wouldn't be able to push their way in. I was on the phone with the operator, and pretty certain my life was going to end. I was shaking so hard that the door was rattling in the doorframe. At one point, the operator told me to listen to what was going on around me, so I forced myself to stop shaking so I could hear. When I heard movement, I began to shake again so the door would rattle. I wouldn't have to hear them walking around. If I was going to be killed by this person, I didn't want to go through the dread of hearing them walking slowly toward me. Eventually, the cops did show up. I had to dart out of the room and run to the front of the house to unlock the front door. They came in and spent all of 5 minutes searching this chaotically laid out rambling house. One of them even commented, "The damn thing just keeps going," in disbelief. They didn't find anything. At first, I thought I must be going crazy. There was no question in my mind I'd heard those footsteps, but the police were telling me all the doors were locked. They ended up leaving quite soon. Because all of the rooms and furniture and weird little nooks and crannies in the house, though, I felt like a small 5-minute search was nowhere near enough to actually find someone who wanted to conceal themselves. I ended up calling my mother crying, and she came over. Then I realized something. The intruder would have walked right past my obvious pile of cash on the kitchen table, and that pile was untouched. This made me think they were not there to burgle. I've often wondered if the person had been waiting for me to go to sleep, hyping themselves up to come upstairs and do whatever the hell they were planning. Perhaps hearing me aggressively call out to them and call the cops deterred them that night. It terrifies me to think of what would have happened if I had just gone to sleep. or what that person was planning, having walked up those stairs so boldly, like it was obvious that someone was supposed to be home. We noticed the next day after checking that the laundry room window in the basement was wide open. Apparently, the police had not even noticed. I searched the news in that area online. There had been a break-in incident just weeks prior, where a woman woke up in the middle of the night to an intruder sitting in the dark watching her sleep. He then proceeded to badly assault her and sexually abuse her. I've been messed up over the whole thing since. The following story is 100% true. The years listed are the estimated dates that this story roamed free for me. It was the only time in my entire life I questioned my own sanity or my own perceptions. I ask that you listen to this in full, as this is one of the few cases where there's an actual ending to this story. I wanted to write this out because I believe this is something we can all learn from. Location: a mid-sized city located roughly 2.5 hours southwest of Chicago. The town sits right on the Mississippi River bordering the state of Iowa. The lady in the woods was sighted at a small park, smack dab in the middle of town. The park is surrounded by roughly 4 to 5 acres of timber. Sometime roughly in 1993 or 1994 was the first time I'd heard about the lady in the woods. I was in 5th grade hanging out with some other boys on the grade school grounds. The story was just your typical ghost story. At Mail Park, our local hangout just blocks away, a child had gone missing after the sighting of a ghost. More specifically, the ghost of a woman dressed all in white. They didn't know the name of the child, but claimed it happened in 1987. Another boy chimed in. Apparently, there was also an adult who had gone missing the night after sighting this same ghost a few years later. In both cases, the sightings happened after the park closed well after midnight. The park was nestled in between neighborhoods, and there had even been reports of people who moved out of their homes after seeing the woman drifting through the woods. There were a bunch of other stories I heard in the years after that included witchcraft, Satan worshipping, kidnapping, murder, the occult. The story gained even more momentum when another boy in our class a few months later found a pentagram spray painted on a tree on a path near the park. We actually rode our bikes out to see it, and it was definitely there, crudely painted in what looked to be a real hurry. This was all one of those things, though, where there was no real way to know if all the parts of the story were connected or if they were just put there because of the story itself. When you're in 5th grade, though, you rarely stop to think those things through. You only see what's right in front of you, and what I was seeing was definitely creepy. May 1995. A friend of ours named Michael lived only a block away from Mel Park. His parents decided to allow him to have a sleepover for his birthday party. He invited 10 of us boys to stay the night, just doing what boys do. God bless those parents, by the way. That night, you can imagine where this thing is headed. Michael knew all about the Mel Park ghost stories. He lived the closest of all of us and had a neighbor who gave him all kinds of crazy information, or so he claimed. He rehashed a lot of the stories we had already heard, and even added a few others as well. After some time, as the clock made its way near 1 a.m., it finally happened. One of the boys suggested we sneak out and see if we could find this lady ghost. So, that's exactly what we did. We all hustled outside, quiet enough, and made our way to Mel Park. Once we arrived there, we broke out into groups. We walked into the overgrown Little League baseball field. A few headed toward the playground equipment near the only streetlight in the park. Myself and one other stayed in the lot nearest to Michael's house. Yes, we were the skittish ones. I wish I could give you all kinds of cool things we did, but real life is not that cool. Essentially, we just kind of walked around looking for ghosts and waiting. Really, we had only been there for maybe 10 to 15 minutes when it happened. I kid you not, exactly like the story within minutes of us showing up. It was like a Lifetime movie. I could see her. There she was in the woods to my north. I saw what looked like a pale white ghostly woman. White hair, white flowing clothes, and white pants. In the dark night, she seemed to glow. It It was literally the perfect example of what you would think of as a ghost. I had never been so scared in my entire life. To this day, it's still the most terrifying moment I've ever been in. Everyone saw her too. All 10 of us. She stuck out like a sore thumb. We jetted immediately. I mean, we ran faster than any of us had ever run before. All of us were completely silent, sprinting towards Michael's home in safety. I could embellish here and tell you that she chased us, or made a move to float towards us or something. I could make it out like her head split in half and bees came flying out. But none of that happened. In fact, she wasn't even looking at us. She was facing a different way entirely. I don't believe the ghostly lady even knew we were there. Instead, she looked as if she was peering deeper into the woods. That was that. We all made it back safely. We spent the rest of the night worried this lady ghost was going to show up and kidnap us. Of course, she never did show. We returned to school, and the Lady of the Woods became even more enshrined in legend. All of us shared the story. All of us backed each other up. We even told one of our teachers, who politely listened and then changed the subject. It was the coolest, most terrifying thing that ever happened to us. We had one of the best campfire ghost stories in history. Well, time passed on like it always does. We moved on from grade school to junior high, then to graduating high school. Once we got a bit older, the story took a backseat to girls and just living life. I wouldn't say it completely died down. We spoke of it in passing every now and then. I know the story continued on in grade school, at least for a short time after we left as well. One of the 10 boys from the birthday party died of suicide shortly after, and it took everything in me not to blame this ghost story on that situation. Now that I'm older though, I don't believe the two are really related. We all moved on to college. I lost touch with all but one of the 10, though I did have a few on Facebook. Now it was 2010. After coming home from college and struggling to find my way in life, I finally started to get my act together. I had a full-time job, married my now wife, got a dog. I even had a couple of kids as well. Eventually, we purchased our first home, which just so happened to be blocks away from my childhood house. I ended up in a tiny house 2 streets over from Mel Park. After those floating years, I ended up right back where it all started. On my days off, I would walk my dog in that very park where the Lady of the Woods had scared me almost to death all those years ago. This is where you really start to question yourself and your senses. At 27 years old, I would stare at the location where I'd seen her glowing all those years before and tried to make sense of what I had seen. Now older and wiser, you spend a lot more time trying to feel things out, rather than just reacting. How in the world did I see a ghost in 6th grade with 9 other people who saw the exact same thing? I know for sure it wasn't a dream. I wrestled with it for a long time, just trying to figure this all out. Summer of 2012, there I am on another walk with my dog, coming up alongside the timber where I'd seen the Lady in the Woods. I was thinking of her again, thinking of all my childhood friends, wondering if they ever thought of that moment too. The thought passed as I moved along a path that led me out of the park. In front of me, a large trailer hooked to a pickup sat in the driveway nearest the park's wooded area. There was a middle-aged man moving some things onto the trailer as I approached. He saw me and waved hello. I said hello back and then decided to make some small talk. I asked him if he was moving. The man responded that he'd just recently sold the home. It was his parents' house and it had sold to a young couple. Closing was coming up shortly. I mentioned a few other things and then started to head off, but I was stopped suddenly. That ghost story was still on my mind, so I decided to ask this man that I didn't know if he knew anything about that story. Why I did that is completely beyond me. It's definitely not something I would normally bring up in conversation. This house was the closest one to the sighting though, and I needed confirmation that somebody else out there knew this story. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I asked him if he'd ever heard the ghost stories around the area. I'll never, in my remaining years, forget what happened next. The man looked at me and smiled. He told me he'd heard those stories aplenty. I was actually relieved that he had because I didn't actually think through how the conversation would go if he had no clue what I was talking about. I then proceeded to give him the shortened version of the story you just read above. He listened very closely. and I could tell he was very interested. When I finished, he took a moment before responding. I used to live in this house before that park was built. My parents raised me here. I moved out in 1983 or 84, and my parents have been here ever since. My dad passed away in 91, and it was just my mom after that. That ghost you saw that night? That was my mom. I looked at him completely confused. He continued. My mom had some medical issues that started in the mid-80s and continued all the way up until she passed away this last spring. You see, the medicine they had her on would cause her to sleepwalk sometimes. I can't even count the amount of times I received calls in the middle of the night from the police department advising me they'd found my mother wandering around in the park. I was recently told one of the neighbors moved out because they were tired of all the commotion. My sister lives out in Texas, but I could never get it through her damn thick skull that our mom needed to be moved to assisted living, so this went on for years. I found out from some friends that she had become a ghost story to the park. My mom had a favorite robe that was all white, and she always slept in the same pearl silk pajamas. Everything was bright white. She even had white gloves she would put on too. I could only imagine what that would look like in the middle of the night with no light around. And that lamp over there, the playground would light her up like a Christmas tree. Never hard for the police to locate her. So, you see, that ghost you saw was just my mom sleepwalking. I bet I even got a call that night. I was speechless. The lady in the woods was real, but she wasn't a ghost, and she wasn't a dream. She was simply a woman. She was this man's mother, lonely and suffering some medical condition that had her wandering the woods unwillingly at night. I wish I knew more, and I wish I knew that at the time. I never saw that man again, and a new couple moved in, probably oblivious to those ghost stories its previous occupant had created. I wonder, does her legend still live on? Are there some 5th graders right now hearing that story for the first time? That story of the lady in the woods, how she appears and kidnaps children. How there's a witch who murders those who see her in the night. I wonder how she felt, hearing all those stories about her. 2021. I moved from that house to a bigger house in a new city. I no longer visit Mel Park. I never did learn that lady's name, and I kicked myself for not asking the man more questions when I could. The thing I find most interesting is how a story can become what it is, how one event or story can impact individuals like it did me. I still think about that lady all the time. When a story rolls around that seems impossible or like paranormal activity, the lady in the woods comes immediately to mind. Sometimes the story is real, but the context is muddled. Now I try to listen. I take in all of the story if I can. If it seems impossible, I hold my tongue. Maybe it is impossible, or maybe the person who experienced it just didn't know what they were seeing. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I hope I helped you learn something with this story. So this happened about 10 years ago, when I was a freshman in college. I had just recently started dating my boyfriend as well. He lived a few towns away from me at that time. We actually now live in a cute apartment not far from where this story takes place. I was taking some of the back roads toward the parkway to get home. I had fallen asleep at his house while watching a movie, so it was around 3 a.m. and I was really exhausted. I knew the way to the parkway well enough, but I was still not that familiar with that particular part of town. As you get closer to the parkway, you have to actually cut through a park to get to the entrance ramp. That being said, there were very few lights around this area. The nearest house wasn't very far away, but it was completely out of sight. I pulled onto the short road and saw a golden sedan stopped right in the middle of the road. It was actually stopped in such a way that it didn't really matter which way you were traveling. It was going to be a squeeze to get around him. Just for a little bit of background, I'm a very small person. At the time, I might have weighed 100 pounds total, and I was only 5 feet tall. I slowed my car down and was trying to see if I could see any headlights coming from the other direction. I wanted to make a move to pull around him, Before I could do anything though, this tall man ran around from the front of this stopped car and started waving his arms to get my attention. As I mentioned, I was small, young, alone, and it was 3 a.m. There was no way I was going to stop for this guy. Even considering all that, this man didn't look particularly worried. He didn't look scary or anything, but an alarm went off in my head that something was not quite right about this situation. I tried to inch up slowly so I could pass him by, but he stood in front of my car and would not let me pass. I quickly locked all my car doors and stopped completely to not run him over. He started trying to talk to me through the window. He was now making his way over to my car. My hearing is not very good. He was so close to me though that I could actually read his lips. He was asking me for help or something. He wanted to take my cell phone to call someone. I said that I was very sorry, but I couldn't do that. He put his hand against my window and pleaded, "Please, please." I said no again, and I didn't care if I ran his foot over. I just left. I was starting to get real scared. I was just barely able to pass by this blockade, but to do so, I had to go into the oncoming traffic lane. I looked in my mirror. The man was now standing in the middle of the road, staring at me. I could see the anger on his face in my brake lights. I pulled back into the right lane, and as I did, my headlights caught 3 men climbing out of the bushes. They were all dressed in the same black t-shirts and jeans, and they were all glaring furiously at me. I could almost feel their anger radiating off of them. I gunned it and flew up that road and onto the parkway. I could feel my entire body shaking. What had just happened here? What were they going to do if I had really stopped? I pulled out my phone and called the police immediately. They had to transfer me a few times because no one could quite figure out who I should be talking to, the county police or the highway patrol. It was basically at the parkway entrance, and no one wanted to deal with me. When I was finally able to tell someone what happened, they sent a car over to check it out. I asked the officer to call me back and let me know if they found them, since I drive over that area a lot. He later told me that by the time they got there, the men and the car were gone, but not even 5 minutes later, another woman called in. Exact same story as me in the exact same location as well. I was advised to not drive over by that park at night anymore. I really had no idea it was not safe at the time, and I've never taken that exit at night since. When I told my parents, my mom cried and my dad was crazy angry, but they were both proud of me for not stopping. There was also a new rule instituted into our family, my boyfriend included, that we had to text someone when we were on our way home just in case. I was 18 years old and on my way home to California on a summer break after my sophomore year of college. I had a 9-hour car ride ahead of me and stocked up on energy drinks, soda, and snacks for the ride home. I left school late after dinner with friends and planned on driving all the way through the night. I was making good time, and I was around 3 or so hours away from home, which was Yuba City at the time. I was just an hour outside of Reno and on a lonely stretch of road when it happened. Very suddenly, I got the urge to pee. I guess it was all those energy drinks I'd chugged earlier coming back to haunt me. I kicked myself in the ass for not stopping when I had gassed up 45 minutes before. I saw a sign that advertised a rest stop coming up and drove the few miles to the sign, then pulled in. Parked in the parking lot was a ratchet-looking sedan, and on the other side of the lot, a Sprinter-type van. I quickly got out and hurriedly jogged to the restroom before I peed myself. I was flushing when I heard someone enter, and I froze. I'm in decent physical shape, and I work out quite often. For a guy, though, I'm on the smaller side, only 5'7" and about 160 pounds. I'm bracing myself for some real Michael Myers-type shit when I open the door, only to see an average Joe-looking guy. He looked up and gave me a friendly smile, then stepped over to the urinal. I washed my hands and was getting ready to leave when he started talking. His voice was gravelly and low, so I couldn't quite hear him the first time. "You like dogs, man?" he asked as he washed his hands. He was wearing those coveralls mechanics would wear, and he had grease stains all over it. My creeper meter started beeping. I shot him a friendly smile and said as I left the bathroom, "Yeah, man, dogs are cool." Well, apparently that was the wrong thing to say. He came out following me through the door, very much on my heels. "I got a new puppy. You want to see him? He's real cute." Now I was freaking out. My keys were in one hand and my cell phone was in the other. I called back to him in a shaky voice. "No thanks, I gotta get going now." I was getting into my car when he grabbed the door trying to pull it open. This dude was hella small, even though he was a good few inches smaller than me. I started up the car and put my phone to my ear. What he said next caused me to almost crap my pants. "By the time the cops get here, you'll already be dead." With that, I kicked out at his stomach. Thank goodness it connected firmly. He let go of my door and fell back onto his ass. I then pulled the door closed and locked it, and screeched the fuck out of that rest stop. I saw him scramble to his car as well, but I didn't stay around to watch. I took off like a bat straight out of hell. I was a nervous wreck for the next 3 hours, thinking that man was going to follow me home and finish me off. When I got home, I told my dad, who had stayed up to wait for me, what happened. He talked me out of calling the authorities. I made sure to take an entirely different route when I went back to school in the fall, and because of that, I've never stopped at another rest stop ever again. This happened back when I was 17 and living in a small rural village. I'd been at a friend's all evening, watching films and chilling. I left to go home at around 11 p.m. It was quite a long walk back to my house, as she lived on the very outskirts of the village down some back roads. I felt relatively safe though, as when it got to a certain time of night, it was always very quiet. You would never bump into anybody, and there would hardly ever be any cars on the roads, especially at that late hour. It was actually very weirdly peaceful. Where I lived was a large avenue with 2 big blocks of houses, like 2 big circles that you would get to after following a small dark road that consisted of a few large old houses and a vicarage. As I was passing by, I saw this beat-up little red Nissan Micra coming towards me. The closer it got, the more it slowed down. The guy was clearly breaking his neck trying to look at me. There was absolutely nothing subtle about this. It nearly came to a full stop as it drew alongside me, and I began to panic. There was not a single other soul about, just me and this strange guy. I was determined, though, not to get myself in a tizzy, so I picked up the pace and refused to look at him. As far as I know, he just drove off without even attempting anything further. I continued to walk home at this point, literally a 5-minute straight line from there. I kept on listening out for a car engine, or any noises to indicate he might be following me. I was also vigilant of any headlights creeping up behind me. I heard nothing though and saw nothing either. I breathed a big sigh of relief as I could now see my house within view. I walked in and locked up the door. I saw my mom stood in the living room chatting with someone on the phone. I was trying to interrupt her conversation to tell her about that weird guy in the red car, when for some reason she went out to the front window and peeked through the curtain. She took the phone away from her ear and said, "What's that car?" This was all a minute since walking through the door. I was thinking to myself, it can't be him, because if he had followed me, I would have heard his car. Before I even got the chance to look for myself though, there was a knock at the front door. As I go to answer it, only pulling it open a few inches, there is that guy, stood there empty-handed, wearing a baseball cap. It was the very same guy from that car. I have no idea how he followed me without me noticing. Can I help you?"
"Yeah, did you order a pizza?" he asked me.
No, I think you have the wrong house." He took a step toward me and said again in a not fucking around kind of tone,
"No, I said, did you order a pizza?"
Before I replied, my mom came up behind me, opened the door fully, and said, "Is there a problem here?" This caused the man to back up and mumble. I guess he was not expecting anyone else to be home.
Oh, I'm sorry, I must have had the wrong address.
He took off and hopped in his car, speeding off into the night. Safe to say, we were both a bit spooked after this, and made sure every part of the property was locked up properly. I'm going to start this by saying that this was a widely publicized case, so a few details have been changed for privacy. The main portion is accurate though. A few years ago, I worked at a popular hookah lounge in my town. We had many regulars, so of course I got to know many people, and even made some lasting friendships with a few. Amongst those regulars was a group of people I was not terribly fond of. All of them except this one girl named Rachel. Rachel was a very kind girl who I enjoyed talking to a lot. I didn't approve of the people she hung out with or the decisions she made though. Even so, it was her life, so what place did I have to say anything about it? Eventually, Rachel started dating another regular named Ben, who was a part of my friend group. This is when we got a lot closer, and she started to trust me and confide in me more about things in her life. Eventually, Rachel and Ben broke up, and it really devastated her. I clearly remember her messaging me to hang out, and her crying on my shoulder for a half an hour. During their relationship, Rachel had stopped hanging around those shady people as much, but of course, afterwards she went right back to them, and started partying a lot and doing who knows what. She stopped talking to me as much as well, and eventually started dating some other guy in that shady group named Greg. Of course, that relationship went south as well, due to reasons unbeknownst to me. Rachel even ended up filling in a restraining order against Greg. A few days later, Rachel went missing, and she was never heard from again. It was awful. Her family started showing up all the time to talk to me, asking if I had seen her. I hadn't, but apparently someone had told them she was last seen downtown somewhere. It really broke my heart. One day, during a busy shift, someone we both talked to sometimes showed up and talked to me about Rachel's disappearance. I'll say his name is POS. POS told me he'd heard all about her being seen somewhere and wanted to know what I knew about it. He asked me if I'd heard anything bad that happened to her. I'm assuming he thought since I worked at a regular hangout spot of hers, I'd have heard something. I told him I didn't know anything though, and we hugged before he walked off to talk to other people about trying to find her. Months passed by before I heard anything else about Rachel. Her family showed up occasionally from time to time asking about her, but nothing had really changed in all that time. Around a year after her initial disappearance though, the police had a big breakthrough in her case, and her body was found. After some investigating, the police discovered that Greg had hired POS to kill Rachel, and he did. He killed her and threw her body away like trash, and continued on with life as usual. The fact that I spoke to POS after the fact, and even hugged him, weighs on my conscience. It's been years, and I'm still so upset about it. He's in prison now, and I'll likely never see him again, but it really hurts. I spoke to her family about her, about having hugged the man who killed her. I wish I had been a better friend to her. I still think maybe I could have saved her if I had done more. I could have insisted she not hang out with those kinds of people. I don't blame myself for her murder, but I think, or maybe wish, I could have done something else. Had I been more insistent, maybe she'd still be here. I don't know. All I do know is that if for whatever reason I ever see that guy again, I won't let him off the hook. He knew she was dead, and he still treated me like a friend and asked if I'd heard or seen anything about her. What a piece of shit. I hope you suffer. I'm a girl and was looking for a no-strings-attached date of sorts with another girl around the time this happened. I just wanted the comfort, I guess. Who knows? I went on Plenty of Fish, the dating site, and let everyone know I was on the market. I matched with only 3 people in all that time. One was a bit nuts right away, so I said no. The other didn't even respond to my message saying hello. The third one was a little bit loopy and overenthusiastic, but we somehow happened to have a lot in common. I'm an exchange student from America, living in the UK, so genuinely I think the Brits are all a little bit crazy anyway. After exchanging a half dozen or so texts per night for the whole week, she insisted on meeting up. We met at my local bar nearby where I stay. She was a bit on the tubby side, but I didn't really mind. She also had long, dark hair, down to her hips. I'd have killed to have hair as long as this. She was very gothic in appearance, dark clothes, black and purple nails. We got to talking straight away, and somehow started sharing our kinks. She was very straight to the point, and very forward with me. She was in no hurry to get to know me. She even insisted I go over to her place right away. Well, I told her to calm her jets and allow me to at least know a little bit about her first. As much as I wanted some comfort, this was going way too fast. It was then that she made a weird confession to me. She started to tell me about her bondage adventures, and how much she loved to punish men. She told me she enjoyed torturing them for fun. I started to laugh this off, but the wickedness in her eyes made me think maybe she was telling me the truth. She saw that I didn't really believe her or take her seriously at first, so she started to go to real extremes with her stories. Then she whipped out her phone. What I saw made me sick to my stomach. She had several photos of men wrapped up in cellophane. I still had my doubts any of this was real until she showed me an actual video of a guy fully mummied in cellophane rolling around on a bed trying to escape. His muffled screams still haunt me to this day. I asked her why she'd do this. She told me because it was fun, letting out a high-pitched squeal as she laughed under her breath. What happened next shocked me the most, though. I asked her what happened to the guy after. She told me, "I don't know, I just left him like that, who knows?" You would have needed a forklift to lift my jaw at this moment. She told me she'd done this to tons of men, and there was a high chance most of them didn't survive. One day, I think you'll be watching the news about the cling film killer, she said. After all of this, she still insisted we head back to her place for some fun, which of course I refused. I waited till she went to the restroom, and I made a run for it. I'd never felt so scared of someone in my entire life. I had missed a few calls from her in that time. It sent chills down my spine. I was too scared to answer this fucking lunatic. I reported her to the police immediately, but I was told I did not have enough evidence of this. Also, her cell number had been mysteriously cut off, and her Plenty of Fish profile had been deleted as well when I went to check. It still sends chills up and down my spine that such a crazy girl would casually confess to such a thing. I'm hoping it's all some sort of sick prank, but I can't unsee what I saw that day. This was November 2016 in Glasgow, Scotland. I was desperate at the time, I must admit. I'd been single and alone for quite some time, and it was really driving me crazy. That's when I met Laura. She came across as a very sweet girl and all, but she was in a real hurry to meet me. So I did. She insisted we go to the pub, no fancy dates necessary to her, but I didn't really mind this. At first glance, I knew I'd been swindled. She looked very different from what I'd seen before. I didn't really mind, though. I was just happy to have a date at all. I didn't exactly think I was very good looking myself, so I decided to give her a chance to redeem herself. We got to talking, and after a few beers, things started to get more intimate. Before I go any further, she was quite an overweight girl with long dark hair, and she had eyeshadow similar to Amy Winehouse. She told me she was a huge fan, actually. I'd asked about her hobbies and interests and all that normal first date stuff, but she kinda rebuked me and instead asked me to talk more about myself instead. I told her about my job and she yawned sarcastically. "Let's talk about your sex life," she said. She slipped her foot out of her shoe and started rubbing my crotch with her bare foot. Needless to say, I was very aroused. Yeah, I didn't have much to say in that department. It had been a while since I'd had sex, so I was very honest with her. I asked about hers. She said she had a lot of kinks, and that she'd done things that I'd never imagined. "Wanna see what I can do?" she said. "Let's go to my place." At this point, I was starting to feel very drunk. I was amazed, as it was only on my 4th pint or so. I did have 2 shots though, so I put it down to this. We waited for a taxi. She was holding my hand excitedly, whispering into my ear that she was going to do some things to me that I'd never experienced before, and probably never would again. In a way though, I actually couldn't wait to just fall asleep. My head kept feeling heavier than the rest of my body, like the ground was moving underneath my feet. The rest was a blur. I can't even remember getting into the taxi. I do remember, though, falling down the stairs at one point, as she was standing above me laughing at me. "Come on," she said. "Get your sexy ass up here." I struggled up the stairs, and before I knew it, from what I remember, I was in her bedroom naked. It was like I just blacked out. I tried to sit up, only to find myself tied to the bed by my arms and legs. She entered the room dressed in bondage gear. I was deeply aroused but very confused at the same time. She performed some sex acts on me before going all the way. I laid there delighted, don't get me wrong, but something felt very off about this all. I had dozed off for quite a bit. I'd been awoken by a weird screeching sound. "What are you doing?" I said, as she was wrapping my legs with cling film. "Hush now, this is the best bit." I was no longer tied to the bed, but I felt very numb all of a sudden, and couldn't move my arms or legs. She kept wrapping me up from my legs upwards. I was screaming at her to stop. Because of this, she placed cling film in my mouth and told me to shut the fuck up. I was struggling to breathe at this point. I tried my best to dislodge that ball of cling film from my mouth. Eventually, I was totally wrapped up from head to toe. I could barely even see anything outside. She told me this was my punishment for being terrible in bed. That she had so many other victims just like me, all wrapped up waiting to die. She left the room and I screamed and screamed. I felt myself slowly fading away into unconsciousness. I woke up on what was now the next day, suddenly able to breathe. This time, there were plenty of people looking at me. They had removed most of the cling film and resuscitated me as well. I wasn't aware of anything until they told me. It turned out I wasn't actually in Laura's flat, but an old abandoned hotel. The police were all over me, asking me questions about what happened. I attempted to show them her Tinder profile, but she had long since deleted the page. I'm grateful to my rescuers that saved me, but I'm forever traumatized by this incident, and I end up with panic attacks when I see people that even look remotely similar to her. It took me a few years to finally trust people enough to go on dates again, and I'm still on the road to recovery mentally. I'm glad that I'm still alive, but I'm wondering if she's still out there, and if there are others like me that did not make it. This happened last night around 7:30 p.m., so it was already dark outside. My friend and I, both 22 and female, were about 2/3 of the way through our 16-hour drive back home from Salem, Massachusetts. I really needed to pee, so we stopped at a rest area in eastern Pennsylvania. I usually avoid rest areas like the plague, but this one looked nice enough, and I didn't really get any bad feelings from it. When we walked in, the only other person inside was this older man, probably mid to late 60s, standing by the vending machines talking on his phone. We walked past him across the room and into the bathroom. We were there for a good 10 to 15 minutes because she apparently wanted to pop a couple of pimples as well. When we were finished, we walked back out laughing at something one of us had said. That man was still standing there, but he was not on the phone anymore. Instead, he smiled and stared at us the entire time it took us to get to the exit of the rest area. We started running back to my car, which was about 6 parking spaces from the door, still laughing but also a little bit freaked out by this guy. We were about to hop in when I remembered my boyfriend wanted us to check my oil on the way home since it was such a long drive. My car had been having some slight issues at the time. I considered waiting until the next time we needed to stop for gas, but I decided to just get it over with now instead. As I was checking the oil, the man from before, along with a slightly younger man we hadn't seen, left the rest area and both began walking toward us. The younger one was coming ahead on the sidewalk, the old one kind of diagonally going the opposite side to the driver's side of our car. This was odd because there was no other cars past mine. The only cars I could see were on the other side of the lot, closer to the building. My friend and I looked at each other and bolted for the car doors. I realized I was still holding the dipstick, so I cursed. We had to run back over and lift the hood back up. We hurried into the car and locked the doors just as they were approaching. We watched as the younger man slowly walked past the car, staring in at us with his completely blank face. He continued walking down the sidewalk for a while, before pausing for a second and turning around to come back towards us. The man, still just smiling, came within a few feet of the other door, then turned and walked past us to the other side of the parking lot. I backed out, and once I straightened the car and started pulling forward to leave the rest area, we saw the man had moved to the middle of the road and was standing there with that unnerving smile. Now he was motioning for us to stop. I drove right past him because no way was I gonna fucking do that. We watched in the mirrors as both men hopped into cars on the other side of the parking lot, closer to the building. We spent the next couple of hours shaken up and blabbing about what could have happened. I'm not really sure what their intentions were, but there can't have been any good reason for them to approach us like that at that rest area. I tried telling myself maybe they were going to ask if we needed help with car troubles or something, but I was very clearly just checking the oil. It doesn't make sense why the younger man would walk the complete opposite direction from his car and go so far down the sidewalk. I'm not really sure what to make of it. "25-year-old male here. I got home last night, which in my apartment complex means all the good parking spots are already taken. I parked a good distance away from my apartment and began to walk over towards it. There was a thunderstorm out that night. It was not raining yet, so the air had energy and smelled real great as well. I decided to take my time and make a loop around my building, then come up behind it. As I made the corner and began walking back down towards my apartment, I saw a guy coming out of the parking lot, right from between two cars. We nodded to each other and I slowed my pace. He began walking ahead of me, but I also noticed that he had slowed down his pace to match mine now. I started to go even slower because of this, intending to cut the corner as soon as we approach it and enter my apartment as soon as possible, the front door just being right on the corner. He seemed reluctant to walk too far ahead of me, so immediately I was on alert. He approached the corner first. I come around. He's at my apartment door, shaking my doorknob. He looks at me as I round the corner and says,
"Damn, lost my keys."
The realization that he was lying and the implication of that lie slammed every one of my systems into high alert. Everything in me told me not to stop there, so I kept on walking and gave him a sympathetic smile. He turned and stared at me, then asked if I had a phone he could borrow. At this point, I'm feeling stuck and panicking, not sure what to do. This man is now pretending he lives in my apartment, so it's not like I can get past him to get in. My car was too far away, and in the dark, any sudden movements would alert him I was now onto him. I explained to him that my phone had died, which immediately caused my heart to skip a beat. Now he must think I can't call the police. I walked one door over and started knocking on the door. It was past midnight around this time. The man was just standing at my doorstep, staring at me. After what felt like an eternity, my neighbor, who I'm on a "hey, how are ya" and "nice night out" speaking terms with, opened the door. I immediately say, "Hey, Kevin," and pushed past him into his apartment. I immediately turned and closed the door to lock it. I explained to him what was happening. He went to grab his gun while I called the cops. The guy was now long gone though. Now I'll never be able to walk around my apartment complex without constantly looking over my shoulder. On a rainy night in the era before cell phones, I was 18 years old, walking a very long way home from work. I foolishly accepted a ride home from a strange man. Small town girl living in her lonely world, and I had just gotten off a double shift. He was elderly and acted genuinely concerned for me. I also saw a Bible in the back seat. Probably safe, right? The car was old and broken down. He had to get out to open the door for me. It took him a while, as he had trouble walking with that bum leg of his. He told me the passenger door didn't open from the inside. I immediately felt weird, but years of nice girl training told me he's gone to so much trouble already, you can't say no now. We chatted for a while and he politely complimented my uniform, my hair, and told me I looked a lot like his late wife, that her spirit must have led him to help me get home. It sounded very sweet in the moment. The conversation turned if I was in school, what my hobbies were, and gradually turned to whether or not I was on my period. This was rude, but he acted like it was going to be the punchline of a joke or something. I laughingly asked him why he would even want to know. He told me very calmly,
Because if you're fertile, we should start trying for a family right away, right?
Oh shit. He said that God had kept him lonely for so many years now, but because I looked so much like his late wife, it was clear I was meant to be his. He could now start life over again and finally have lots of children like his wife was unable to do. He grabbed my hand firmly and kissed it.
I can't wait to show you to our new bed.
I told him I forgot something at work. He told me I could go get it tomorrow. I told him I needed to pee. He said it could wait until we got home. He was not going to let me out now. He kept talking about how things were different back then. Men are the head of the household, and women are to follow their fathers and husbands no matter what. God says this, God says that. He talked about his wedding day and how his wife's father had given her to him. I blurted out he was going to have to get my father's permission to marry me before taking me home, right? God would want that after all. You need to do that, because otherwise we would be living in sin, and the marriage bed would not be holy. Luckily, I had remembered that from my many days of church sermons. He got really offended then, said he knew the Bible far better than I ever would, and of course he knew to ask my father for permission. Well, I told him we couldn't exactly live together in sin. We should go to my house instead before going home. I reminded him the street was not very far away. I was still trying to keep the conversation light and joking. I kept pushing him. That's what a godly man would do after all. He now wholeheartedly agreed. We got to the street where I had previously told him I lived. He asked which house was my parents'. I gave him a fake house number, far away from my actual house, and had him drop me off there. He wanted to come inside. I told him I needed to let my parents know about God sending me a husband before he could meet them. I said it would take a few days. Come back tomorrow. He told me,
I'll give you a few minutes, but then we need to be on our way.
I told him to drive around the block so I could at least have time to pack my clothes. He nodded and finally opened the car door. I ran to that house's door and waved to him until he drove away. Then I sprinted over to my house, where I lived alone. I double-bolted my door and put the couch in front of it that night. I never saw that man again either. I did not call the police, though I wish I had. I moved in with my boyfriend a few days later, and I insisted on waiting at work from then on until he could pick me up every night. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe he was trying to be nice, but every red flag was raised, and every alarm inside me was going crazy. This happened just a few hours ago, and I'm safe now. I don't think I have anything else to worry about. You see, I'm going to another country to see a band I love. I found a cheap Airbnb online and booked it. I was supposed to come in last night, but the flight was delayed. My train was also missed. It was a nightmare trip all in all. I was supposed to get to this place after midnight. The owner told me that was totally fine. I checked the reviews about him, and all of them said he was a lovely host and actually very nice. I noticed, though, that every single one of these reviews had all been written within the last few weeks. Red flag number 1. At this point, I missed the final train and was unable to get to the place that night. I told him I couldn't make it, but I would be there tomorrow. He said that was okay. I got to the train station of the city I'm in, and I decided to walk because I didn't have that much cash with me. I walked for about 40 minutes and got to a place that could be called run down at the very best. I saw drug dealers everywhere. You could just tell sometimes, you know. The door, which had the right number on it, was just a white door next to a shop. Red flag 2, 3, and 4. I had never been able to get a hold of him after. I had his number, but it would always go to an answering machine, and he didn't answer any of my texts either. I walked into that shop and asked if someone lived there. The guy in this shady-ass shop said, "A few? Who are you looking for?" I told him my host's name. He was playing with his phone in a way I couldn't see anything of what he was doing. Instantly, I got a message from my host. He says he's almost there. I leave the shop and realize that was red flag number 5. A half an hour later, this guy came up in a car with a girl in the front seat. "Hi there, I'm your host. It's the wrong address on the side actually. Hop in the back and I'll take you there." At this point, I just said, "You know what, thank you, but I'll find somewhere else to stay." After that, I walked away. I don't really know what was going on with all that, but it was very, very suspicious. This happened just a couple of months ago, so I'm still quite on edge from the experience. I had a group of friends that lived about an hour and a half away from me. I would very frequently go and hang out with them. The drive never really bothered me too much, but after this particular night, I started to really dread it. I first noticed the car following me about 20 minutes into my trip home. It was about 2 a.m., so not many cars were on the road at that time. This guy was practically riding my bumper. I thought this was really strange, because obviously there were no other cars out. There was a whole lot of room. I wrote it off though and tuned back into my music. The time on the freeway was about 55 minutes. He was directly behind me for the entirety of it. When I noticed him getting off at the exact same exit as me, I began to get a little bit anxious. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid. I was heading home as I normally would, until I noticed that this car was also making every turn right behind me. At this point, I started to turn down random roads to test my theory of this person following me. Just as I suspected, they were trailing behind me exactly. I stopped going towards my house at this point and started driving randomly, trying to think of what I could do in this situation. I tried whipping down roads at the last second, but that didn't work. I was driving through red lights and stop signs. I was scared of what he would do if I stopped. I was desperate at this point. I called the police and told them I was being followed for over an hour. I gave them a description of the car and my location as well. The dispatcher told me to drive to the police station and there would be officers waiting in the parking lot. As soon as I turned into it, the car sped off immediately. One of the police cruisers immediately flipped their lights on and followed them. I stayed at the station and gave my statement, but I never got a call or anything like that. After that night, I only drive during the day now. I don't know what would have happened if I were to just go straight home. Update. I followed up with the police station. The officer I spoke to said he wouldn't get into detail, but there was a lot of meth found in the man's car, along with a lot of sharp weapons as well. He's now in jail, and I definitely needed that peace of mind. This happened to me this past Friday night. I, 30 and female, work at a bar on weekends, about a mile away from my house. In nice weather, I like to walk the commute. It's a quiet residential area. The halfway point between my house and work is a park with a basketball court and adjacent baseball field. Usually, I won't walk both to and from work in the same day. Instead, I'll take an Uber at least one way. The time and days I walk home vary as well. This is all for context. This night, I left work at around 12:30 a.m. About 2 blocks away from it, I heard someone walking behind me now. At first, I thought it was one of the guys I work with. We've crossed paths on the walk home before, since we're somewhat neighbors. When I turn around to look though, no, it's a young guy, maybe my age at most. He's on the other side of the street, about a block behind me. The man now started singing. At first, I thought it was no big deal. Maybe he wanted to make sure he didn't sneak up on me and startle me. But the singing started to get kind of eerie. It was starting to make my hair on my neck rise. I started to pay attention and tried to hear for clues of mental instability or any direct communication to me. I was about a block from the sports field, and this person was getting slowly closer and closer, now maybe 30 or 40 feet away. I realized at this point that the houses just past the fields were kind of unkempt. I'd never seen anyone outside even during the day, aka no one would be around to help me if I needed it. I decided it was getting way too creepy. I abruptly turned around and started walking the same way I'd come from. The guy kept walking his same direction. I didn't look back more than once to confirm. I waited on a corner for 2 or 3 minutes, debating if I should call an Uber, return to the bar, or just keep on walking. I'd already texted a coworker who was still there that I was being followed, sketched out, and to be worried if I didn't send a text upon my arrival home. Like any good horror movie though, I stubbornly decided to keep walking home along my original route. The Uber was 7 minutes away and $10 for a half-mile trip anyway. Plus, I'd be a complete sitting duck waiting for it. I didn't want to walk the half-mile back to the bar when my house was the exact same distance either. I was ultimately and finally swayed by the fact I'd had a real rough shift at work, and the walk always unwinded me. It was a dumb choice, and clearly the wrong one, but that's how I arrived at it. As I soldiered on, I turned onto the street with the basketball court and field. In the parking lot, there was this tiny compact car, the kind you might refer to as a clown car. It was pulling out of the lot. A car was approaching, so it was waiting directly in my path. As I slowed down, my gut was saying not to get too close. Eventually, it pulled out and turned in the direction I was headed, but went straight instead of turning where I would be heading. I sighed in relief. I noticed a sharp smell as I passed by the parking lot, almost like dry leaves, earthy but unidentifiable. I just chalked it up to my conscience being on high alert. I turned onto the upcoming street, which was the final stretch of dark residential area before I reached the almost home, safer leg of the trip. I tripped over the curb and chided myself for looking vulnerable for even a moment. I then paused to regain my composure. There was a U-Haul truck parked about 100 feet ahead of me on the opposite side of the street. As I looked up from tripping, I could see 2 figures now emerging from behind the truck. They were in identical all-black outfits, weird black pilgrim-esque hats, and what I thought to be clown masks. My first thought was, oh fuck, I'm fucked. I thought of that weird clown thing that happened a few years ago. After a moment, I realized the masks were all white though, so either Michael Myers or Jason masks. This was somehow a relief. Clowns would have had me so terrified I'd have frozen up. Something about the way these guys were moving toward me was extra eerie too. Outfits aside, my body was screaming to get out of there. Without speaking to each other or me, they began walking diagonally across the street right towards me. They never even turned to communicate with one another. Immediately, I did a 180 and started power walking. I was already holding my phone as a precaution from that first guy, so I FaceTimed my roommate. She doesn't pick up. I called the cook, the guy I thought the first guy was. He picks up on the second ring. "Where are you? I need help. I'm being followed." I was in a complete panic. He climbed into his car and said he'd be there in 2 minutes. For some reason, the call now dropped. I was now by the fields, and I realized they were again crossing the street, getting even closer to me. I called him back and told him to stay on the line this time because I was not okay. It had to be obvious I was now terrified. The abrupt change of direction, the phone calls, the looking over my shoulder. The park is a great place to smoke. It was almost Halloween as well. I turned into the street where the singer had followed me and paused. The house on the corner of the park was my #1 pick if I had to end up banging on the door for help. They were always outside working on their cars, and the property is well maintained. Their windows are within 10 feet of the sidewalk. Just kinda gave off good Samaritan vibes, you know. A stark contrast to the surrounding houses I'd never seen anyone in. My friend pulled up to the corner within 2 minutes of my first call. A miracle. I ran and hopped in, tears starting to slow from the adrenaline release. We started driving back along my original path. Those guys were still there, now standing in the basketball court's parking lot, mask still on, not moving, seemingly waiting for me. They watched us as we drove away. I got home, locked my door, and did my best to calm down before going to bed. Obviously, I did not sleep very well. I called my dad the next day to share my story. He thought the first guy could have been a scout. The sharp smell could have been from either or something. He insisted I talk to the police. I worked again that night, but slightly traumatized. I got a ride in. I couldn't bear to walk that path even in broad daylight now. I stopped at the police station after work and gave them a play-by-play, but only of the 2 masked creeps. The first singing guy seemed kinda like a stretch to connect to them, and the cops were looking slightly skeptical as well. The one asking me for details finally turned to the other officer next to him and asked him to start his patrol at the park that night. They were polite but unfazed, didn't even take my name or anything. The last creepy bit was finally heading home that night. It was exactly the same time, 12:30. A friend was giving me a ride, and we decided to take the same route and see if anything seemed off. That same clown car was parked in the basketball court parking lot. My friend suggested pulling over, half kidding, but I insisted we not even try to fuck around with that. This happened 2 years ago. Typical normal day in my suburban neighborhood. My wife asked me to run to the grocery store for something. It was around 2 or 3 p.m. When she asked me, I was sitting in the dining room, which was right next to the garage. Instead of walking to the front door and then all the way around to the front of my house to my car in the driveway, instead I just went out the door next to me that led into the garage. I hit the button to open the garage door, and it started to rise. I walked over and ducked to walk out before it was finished rising. I stopped dead in my tracks when I realized there were 2 people standing right in front of me in my driveway. A very overweight man and a very overweight woman. This caught me totally off guard. I probably muttered some type of hello, then asked if I could help them with something. Before I had time to focus on their response though, I noticed the woman wasn't looking at me like the man was. She was holding a fake baby in her arms, cradling it and telling it to shush. This left me flabbergasted. I immediately assumed they, or at least she, might be mentally disabled. I looked over to the man. Without missing a beat, he asked me if I could give them a ride to the store. I made up some excuse why I couldn't take them, even though that's where I was going. The man's face immediately turned red. The woman never even looked up at me. I walked around them and got in my car. I locked it, hit the garage door opener on my visor, and then called my wife. Meanwhile, the man was glaring at me through the windshield. I told my wife what was going on, and to make sure all the doors and windows were locked just in case. Before backing out of my driveway, I waited for the 2 people to start walking away. Eventually, they did. I asked my wife if she wanted me to stay instead. She wasn't worried though. She told me it was fine. She'd still like me to go and get what she needed. The grocery store was only a couple miles away from my house. I grabbed the item, paid, and left as quickly as possible, still kind of worried about that strange encounter I'd had. As I was driving back home, I saw the 2 people walking down the sidewalk toward me. The woman was still looking down. The man saw me again and got very obviously upset, then walked out into the middle of the road in front of me. I could tell he was trying to say something, but instead I drove around him and continued home. My wife called the non-emergency number and they told us they'd send an available officer to the area to drive around and take a look. I never saw them again. I have no idea if they were going house to house asking for a ride or what. A part of me feels bad thinking they both might have been mentally disabled and just wanted a ride to the store, but the whole encounter was just too bizarre. If they hadn't surprised and spooked me the way they did, I may have given their request more consideration. I'm a 17-year-old guy currently living in Phoenix, Arizona. This incident took place around 6 months ago on an overnight trip into the Superstition Mountains, which are about an hour drive east of Phoenix. I'm not going to specify the exact trail. I've been doing this stuff long enough to realize what happens when you post stuff on the internet, whether it's a good trail, an abandoned mine, ghosts, or whatever it may be. People come flocking over, usually with a lot of trash and very loud music. Anyway, this particular trail I was taking was an 8-mile loop through a canyon. Pretty simple in and out overnight trip. I had planned to go with my friend, but a last-minute cancel on his part left me on my own. So, with a packed bag and car ready to go, I decided to go on my own. Not leaving the house on time and some trouble navigating rough forest roads, I didn't arrive to the trailhead until around 5:45. For those of you who don't backpack, this is a very big no-no. I had about a 4-mile hike until I arrived at my planned camping spot, and it was getting dark fast. I figured though if I moved quick enough, I could get at least 2 or 3 miles in before I had to find a spot. This strategy left me hiking a very dark trail on my own, with about 15 miles of dirt road between me and anyone else. Hiking in the dark by itself is scary, especially for where I was and being all on my own. Eventually it got so dark, I could only see where my headlamp was pointing. That's when I figured I needed to stop and get a camp set up, with only using the headlamp as my light source and trying to move fast. I ended up in a less than ideal spot. There were some burnt pieces of wood and remains of a fire circle, so it looked like people had been there before. Definitely not recently though. My first priority was to get a fire going. I scanned the area around me and was able to find some dried wood. I got the fire going. I got my tarp set up as well and cracked open a can of chili mac I had brought for myself. I was very much looking forward to eating it. I was feeling good, my camp was set up, my food was on the fire. The feeling of uneasiness from the hike had almost gone away, but it was still there. To fully understand what happened, I have to explain to you how my camp was set up. The site I had picked was a small clearing, surrounded by large pine trees with the trail about 30 feet to my left. When you're in the woods and have a fire going, the fire casts a circle of light around it, and everything on the edge of that circle and past it are pitch black. I was sitting on the ground near my fire, eating my dinner, when a small rock about the size of a marble was thrown into my camp. I looked at that tiny rock in shock. I was positive I was the only person on the trail that night. I immediately turned my light on and towards the area where I had seen the rock come from. Due to the density of the pines and brush though, I could only see about 10 feet. I spent the next 10 to 15 minutes in disbelief as I scanned the tree line that surrounded me, searching for whatever or whoever had thrown that rock. I didn't dare to stray far from my fire. In hindsight, it offered me a false sense of security. After sitting back down and spending the rest of my time on high alert, I was able to convince myself that I had somehow kicked the rock, or it had fallen from a tree or something. I went to sleep that night, not expecting the pure terror that was about to unfold. I woke to the sound of rustling leaves, barely audible if you weren't listening for them. They were there though. Still in a sleepy haze, I listened as the rustling of leaves got harder to hear. I assumed this must be moving away from me. I went to grab my handheld flashlight that I had left next to me when I had fallen asleep. The more I looked though, the more scared I got. I realized it was no longer there. I stood up in my sleeping bag and ducked out of my tarp and looked around. I was able to see a light off in the woods. It couldn't have been more than 15 feet away. It was my flashlight, laying on the ground in a pile of leaves. This is one of the few moments in my life where I must have almost shit my pants. The flashlight I had left sitting right next to me when I had fallen asleep a few hours ago was now away from me past the tree line out in the woods. I hurriedly slipped on my boots, clutching my knife in my other hand and keeping my head on a swivel. I weighed my options. Stay here and wait out the night, or attempt the 3-mile hike back in the car in the dark. I figured whatever or whoever was out there was definitely gonna have a better advantage if I was out on the trail without a light. I decided to stay at the camp and wait out the night there. Eventually, whatever it was came back. I could hear it walking through the woods. It was far off, but I could still hear. It sounded like someone walking slowly by, like they were on a gentle stroll without a care in the world. Sometimes it would walk far away and I would lose the sound of the steps altogether. An hour later, maybe 2, it would return, fainter than ever. This went on for about 3 or 4 hours until I listened as the steps got closer and closer. They were about 7 feet away from me. At this point, the fire had gotten very small as I had run out of wood in my pile. The footsteps stopped and everything went totally silent. I sat there still for 2 hours, clutching a knife in my hand, and prayed I would not hear anything further. I stayed like that until the sun cast enough light that I could see that I was alone in my campsite. I packed up my things and speed-walked the 3 miles back down the trail I had taken. I arrived at the empty dirt road where my car was parked and sprinted to it. As I unlocked my Subaru, I jumped in and drove, and didn't stop until I had put at least 20 miles between me and that place. I stopped at a gas station in Apache Junction to buy a Red Bull, but mostly to see or talk to another person. As I exited the store, I was able to read what was written in the dust on the back window of my car. Sleep well? A lot of weird things have happened to me on my various adventures through Arizona, but this is the weirdest and scariest by far, so I thought I'd share it. There is a seriously deranged person living in the Superstition Mountains. Do yourself a favor and stay as far away from those mountains as you can. This happened when I was about 5 years old. I have 6 siblings, a big fat Greek family. We lived in a normal, safe, suburban area in the Midwest. My mom had always drilled it into my head and my siblings' heads not to ever talk to strangers, especially adult strangers. She would always tell us that if an adult was ever asking anything from a child, something was instantly wrong. I was playing outside with my older sister, who would have been about 7 years old at this time. Our house was just on the corner, so we had the main road and then the road leading into the neighborhood. Around this time, we had also just gotten our very first family dog. She was a beagle and really tiny. We had her tied up with a leash to one of our trees playing around. I remember being by the puppy and playing with her by myself for a bit. At that point, she was around a month or 2 old. All of a sudden, this golden sedan pulled up alongside the road leading into the neighborhood, and a grown-ass man got out. He was probably in his mid-30s. The man called out to me,
Hey, you there! That's my dog!
Huh? No, it's not. This is our dog. Her name is Corky.
No, really, that's my dog. I just lost her and I've been looking everywhere for her. Come here, I'll show you a picture. You can see that she's really mine.
I distinctly remember taking 2 steps toward the man. All of a sudden, all sorts of alarm bells started going off, and I couldn't say anything. At this point, my sister had noticed what was happening. She came over and stood beside me. I was just shaking my head no at the man. My older brother had been in charge of babysitting my sister and I, and must have heard the conversation from inside. He ran outside and started yelling at the guy, asking what the fucking problem here was. As soon as the man saw my brother come out, though, he jumped in his car real quick and sped off right away. I always wonder how different my life would be today had I been too naive of what horrible things adults are capable of. I'm super grateful to my brother, who saved my ass, and to my mom, who made me paranoid for good reason. My then fiance and I were looking to move out of his parents' house, and we were trying to find the cheapest rent possible. Of course, this meant we went immediately to Craigslist. We found this whole basement suite with a large walk-in closet area that connected to the bedroom and an attached bathroom as well. It was only $450 a month, and since it was an entire suite for both of us, of course, we couldn't resist. We met with the two girls also looking to rent the place, and we all did a background check on each other and started to get to know one another. In hindsight, you should never trust a Craigslist ad for a roommate. Just don't do it, trust me. We rent out the place, and everything seems to be going well at first. We start decorating, and we all throw a party to celebrate this new home. We were all about the same age of 21, except for one of the girls who was only 19 at the time. She had a cat who was not fixed, and honestly, I'm not sure why she even had it with her. She would always lock it out of her room, and the cat would just cry for her incessantly, howling for attention, and also, I imagine, because she wanted to mate. Flash forward a few months. This 19-year-old was not taking care of the cat at all. The litter box was always full of crap, and she would often forget to feed her as well. I started to take it upon myself to take care of the poor thing. As soon as I did that though, she stopped buying litter and food altogether. This would go on for a while, and I always felt really bad for that cat. I would start buying the stuff just to make sure the thing stayed alive. This 19-year-old also had a big attitude problem. On top of that, whenever told she needed to clean up after her own space, she would become totally defensive and mean. She would leave half-eaten food on the counter for days, raw chicken exposed in the fridge, raw chicken left on the counter to sit, and would never ever clean her own dishes. All this too I took upon myself, because I couldn't stand to look at the sheer filth. I'd also like the place to be presentable whenever I decided to have company over. Things got way worse though, when my other roommate decided to just up and leave one day. She didn't give us a single bit of notice, just gone. Now we were stuck with a 19-year-old roommate, and desperate to find someone else to help with rent. This meant we got another roommate, but around this point weird things started happening. Clothes started to go missing. I found this odd because the laundry room was in the basement, and there would often be stuff strewn about in there as well. Once we got the other roommate, more clothes started to go missing. I didn't automatically think it was the 19-year-old being a klepto, but as time went on and more things started to go missing, I started to realize it was most likely her. I stopped going upstairs altogether. We bought a microwave for the basement, and basically just lived off microwave canned foods because it was so purely disgusting upstairs in her area. To make matters even worse, she would now lock her cat in the mudroom for the whole day. We could hear her crying and begging someone to let her out. There was a ton of poop and urine all over the place. The upstairs became a place for the cat to go because she still wouldn't change the damn litter. I got too tired of cleaning up after her and just avoided seeing the mess. Toward the end, the power went out and the basement was flooded. My ex and I had to stay at his parents' house because our area was unlivable at that point. The maintenance guy came to fix the sump pump, and it seemed to be good to go. Little did we know that the money we were paying towards the bill was not actually going towards it. Once the power went out, we demanded to see the bills, certain they were overdue. Oh, and it was, by nearly $1,000. We were completely livid. There was no way we could pay that for her, as we'd already been giving her money. We decided to pack up and inform our landlord of the situation. The landlord was horrified at the state of everything, and very quick to confront the girl. Shortly after that, she disappeared altogether. I came back to continue packing. I could only handle so many hours in that dreadful heat. I heard the screams of the cat she'd locked in the mudroom. Her owner gone for 2 days now. She was completely out of food and water. I let her out of that filthy, humid room, and I started crying. How could she just abandon her in there like that? The landlord was coming over every other day now, and we were devising a plan together. I had received a message from the roommate that said she was now away in Florida. and her boyfriend would be coming to take the cat. Well, of course, he never showed. After about a week, I contacted a rescue and sanctuary and had them come pick up the cat. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention she had left a kitten in there as well. I was left to clean up the mess while my ex went to work, and I did a damn good job if I do say so myself. There was one place we never looked though, and that was my roommate's room. Finally, the landlord and I decided to go inside. It was completely trashed, clothes and food strewn all over the place. There was also a pipe she had stolen from our past roommate for weed, and several other things she'd stolen from the rest of us over time. Most horrifyingly, though, was on the walls, painted on the chalkboard. On this wall, she had drawn us all hanging from a noose, and next to that was all of the debt she owed. I'll give her credit that her art was pretty good, but it was absolutely disturbing, and we all left in a hurry. Long story short, the landlord dealt her an eviction notice. We left, the cats were saved, and we never talked to that person ever again. Boy, oh boy, do I have an answer for this. The year was 1993, and I was a freshman in college. A friend of mine told me he wanted to get an apartment, and asked if I might want a room with him. We looked around and found a reasonable 2-bedroom not far from campus. It was also not far from our job either, since we both worked at the same place at the time. After we signed the lease, but before we moved in, he asked if I was okay with his cousin living with us as well, his female cousin. That should have been my first red flag. I asked him where she was going to sleep since it was only a 2-bedroom. He said he'd just sleep on the couch and she could have the other room. Against my better judgment, I relented and told him this arrangement was okay. I did tell him though that he would eventually get tired of sleeping on that couch, and in that point I was not going to give up my room for him. We got all moved in. About a week later she showed up. I'm not gonna lie, this girl was very attractive. She got moved in and found a job. Everything was perfectly fine and normal for the first week. Then though, my friend comes in and tells me that his cousin had a thing for me. Now, even though I thought she was really attractive, I knew better than to try and get involved with a roommate. I told my friend that was not going to happen. Thankfully, she seemed to take that well. Another 2 weeks go by though, and they both suddenly quit working. They just up and quit their jobs and didn't even have another one lined up. Now I was the only one doing anything, and the only one paying for everything as well. I had no idea how they were going to come up with their share of rent for the month. We were now in week 3 of worrying when it happened. Since they weren't having to go to work or go to class, they would go out every night and get wasted, then come home and sleep basically all day. Well, one night I get home from work and climb into bed to sleep. I wake up with that feeling you get when you know you're being watched. I slowly turned over to the other side, only to see this girl was in my bed, staring at me while I slept. I'm not sure if she wanted to murder me or have sex with me by the way she was looking at me, but it was creepy. She was just laying there, staring at me. I promptly sent her back to her bedroom and locked my door firmly. The next morning, I got up to get ready for work. When I went to take a shower, I noticed that all of the towels were now missing. I asked my friend what the hell had happened to him. He told me that his cousin had gone to the bathroom in the middle of the night and grabbed all of the towels to her room. I went to her room to get them back. Those were the first presents my parents had given me when I moved out after all. Suddenly, she just started screaming at me. From then on, whenever she would see me, she would just immediately get psycho every time we were together. She started stealing stuff from my room when I wasn't there. She'd take food that I'd eaten a portion of, like a gallon of milk or something, and throw it at me for me opening it. I was the only one buying groceries, remember? Just a total nutcase. Well, I told my friend this was not going to work out. I asked him to go to the landlord with me to see what could be done about the lease. Thankfully, though, the landlord was my savior. He agreed to put the cousin on the lease and take me off. I have no idea why the guy was such a bro about it, but I didn't ask. I was just happy he was helping me. I packed up my stuff that very day and got the hell out of there. I heard afterwards that my friend's cousin was going crazy for a while until she found some random guy she started sleeping with. They moved him in to pay rent, and all three of them ended up getting arrested and kicked out of the apartment for making meth. That was the craziest month of my life, and aside from my wife, that's the only time I ever decided to have a roommate. So time travel back with me to 2004. I was a freshman in college. I just moved into a new apartment and out of the dorms. Believe it or not, renting an apartment and splitting the rent 4 ways was a lot cheaper than living at the school. My roommates and I, though, lost our 4th person, so we put out an ad to try and fill up that 4th spot. A girl who we'll call Callie answered that ad. She was the only person who responded as well. She got the spot without even so much as an interview, needless to say. That very same day, she came and moved in. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. My other 2 roommates shared a room, and I was alone in mine, so Callie would be moving into my room. I helped her unpack all our things, and we chatted for a bit. She seemed perfectly normal and very friendly that first day. Then night came, and we all headed off to bed. Back then, I suffered some pretty bad PTSD from an abusive childhood and had lots of nightmares. I did not sleep well at all. This night was no different. I woke up from a nightmare in the middle of the night and sat up in my bed bolt upright sweating. When I looked across the room, I saw Callie sitting straight up in her bed, rigid as a board, eyes wide open, staring at me unblinking. Callie, are you okay? I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. She kept on staring at me. I was already unsettled from my nightmare, and I was beginning to get significantly more creeped out. Callie, are you alright? Did you have a nightmare too? I asked her. Still no response. She didn't move a single inch. Then suddenly, she turned her head to look forward, still unblinking, stiff as a board. She began to crawl forward towards me in a way that seemed impossible. Her body was so stiff. I don't even know how she was moving, keeping her spine ramrod straight like that. She looked like something straight out of The Exorcist. Needless to say, I got up and sprinted out of the room. I grabbed my blankets and headed to the living room to the couch. I couldn't exactly sleep well there either. I was just staring at that doorway to our room, waiting for her to emerge like a demon. Fast forward 18 years. Kelly and I are now best friends. It turned out that she had some sort of weird sleepwalking sleep paralysis thing that made her behave in really strange ways whenever she would go to bed. Luckily, she's on medication and doesn't do those things anymore. But damn, was that sure one creepy introduction. So this encounter happened many years ago when I was very young. It was in 2001 or 2002, I think. I was around 11 to 12 years old at that time. My uncle was interested in purchasing some land near Red Oak, Oklahoma. I don't know exactly where, but it was several acres in a very remote area. My mother, father, and myself decided to accompany him one Saturday to go and scope out the property beforehand. From our home, it was a little more than a 3-hour drive or so, but we all really loved riding in the car, so while it was not going to be the most eventful of all road trips, we went just to get out of the house. Upon arrival, I remember being very underwhelmed by the place. There were no houses anywhere near, hardly any signs of life at all apart from a few birds, and the wooded area wasn't exactly what I would call picturesque. Still, we parked our car off the road to go and explore the woods a bit more. My uncle was talking about buying the land for hunting. Not exactly my cup of tea. As we walked through the woods, it was a very nice day, but immediately I could sense that something felt off. Everyone in our group remarked about this eerie feeling, but my dad and uncle seemed to laugh it off. My mom had goosebumps and kept looking over her shoulder, which made me very on edge too. She was very insistent that this was too weird and she wanted to leave right now. It felt like we were being watched. After a bit of hiking, I noticed there was a small red building out in the woods. I'd seen bigger storage sheds in the suburbs, but it looked very well made. It was so out of place. My uncle said there was nothing about this building on the listing, so we went to go have a peek inside. The door was wide open. Inside there were open cans of food, a ratty blanket on the floor, and it stunk unlike anything I'd ever smelled before. Following this discovery, we all agreed it would be best to get back to the car if there was truly some crazy hermit living in the woods. We didn't want to be around that kind of person. Only issue was, we had now walked pretty damn far into them, and now we weren't exactly sure which direction was the correct way. The eerie feeling really amped up, and we were all on edge. We ended up trekking another mile or so before we finally found the road again. We were further down though from where we had parked the car. At least we could just follow it to where it was now though. Walking along that road, we came across a truly unsettling sight. Smack dab in the middle of the asphalt, there was a dark gray cat, now on fire. I have no idea why a cat was out in the middle of nowhere, or how it came to be killed and set alight. Obviously though, this had just happened, and there was no one in sight. We sprinted the rest of the way to the car. When we arrived, there was a huge scratch in the paint all the way down the side, from the hood to the trunk, and it was splattered with blood. Thankfully, this was the only damage, and my dad was able to start it without any trouble. We drove away as fast as we possibly could. My heart sped up just recounting this event. Definitely one of the scariest of my life. Needless to say, my uncle did not end up buying that land. I'll always remember this terrifying encounter, but like anything else, over time I sort of pushed it to the back of my mind. It became just another one of those many odd moments you occasionally retell at family get-togethers years later, so much so that it's nearly a funny story. The actual reason I'm sharing this is because I was reminded of it last night while binge-watching some episodes of BuzzFeed Unsolved on YouTube. They shared a story of a family that had disappeared in the same area while also looking at some land for sale. The disappearance of the Jameson family is the name of that mystery in the video if you're interested. The family died in the same area we were searching, roughly 7 years after we made our trip there. There are many theories about their deaths, including the allegations of some sort of cult in the area, complete with something about dead cats. Coincidence? Probably, most likely, but the whole story gave me chills. I wonder if my family narrowly avoided being killed by some witches or a cult or whatever, or if we just stumbled upon a crazy hermit who wanted us out of his woods. A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided we wanted to give the southern portion of Virginia's trail a shot. It's about 165 miles long, and runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forests, from Roanoke County to Petersburg in Giles County. It's definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we were looking for. We gathered up our gear and made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our long journey. We had planned to end at Damascus and figured that by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to get home to our own beds. It was early October, and the changing of the leaves and colors was amazing. The air was crisp and cool, perfect hiking weather, with very beautiful scenery to match. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful. Just your typical hike, really. Over the last couple of nights, that's where things started to get weird. On this portion of the trail, you're supposed to camp on the trail or at a designated shelter. We really didn't want to run into other people, and didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night either. We decided to ignore those suggestions and find our own little spot just off the trail. After a little bit of searching around, we find the perfect spot a little ways off the trail in the middle of this small clearing. We set up camp, cooked some food, and talked for a while, then snuggled up and went to sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I was woken up by my girlfriend, shaking me awake. "Get your gun. Someone is walking around our tent." She informed me she'd woken up to what sounded like someone right outside, running a knife or something along the side of the tent while circling us. When hiking, I always carry a 1911 and a judge with me. You never know exactly who or what you might run into when on such a long hike in such a remote location. I grabbed my judge out of my pack, and we sat silently listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees, but then I heard it. Someone or something walking in the woods just behind our tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way outside. Our fire had gone out, so it was nearly pitch black now, illuminated by only the dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put while I checked things out. I didn't flick my light on right away, as to not give myself away that I was out of the tent now. I didn't want it to become a shining beacon of my location. Instead, I listened even closer. After a few minutes, it sounded like it was bipedal, based on the way the steps were paced. I turned on the light and flooded the area. I could see someone move quickly behind a tree. I yelled out and told them to leave and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area, with my gun drawn and ready. I slowly approached towards where I thought I'd seen them. From my right, I heard what sounded like someone sprinting away through the woods. I turned and faced my light that way. Then from the original spot, I heard whoever was there take off as well. There was no way I was going to give chase, so I simply returned to the campsite. I told my girlfriend about what happened, and I ended up sitting guard outside the tent in the darkness until daybreak. In the morning, I looked around a bit for signs of who or whatever it was. I discovered a boot print in some soft, moist dirt, not far away from our tent. It was obviously not mine and not my girl's either. This really freaked me out. It confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one person, was skulking around our tent in the dark. I kept this to myself though. I didn't want to freak my girl out any more than she already was. At this point, we were pretty deep in, and still had 2 days left to go. That day, we walked a little bit faster than normal, and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to set up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we could place the tent in a small overhang and prevent anyone from coming up behind us. The whole day up to this point, I had that weird feeling of being followed. I didn't have any confirmation of this, as I hadn't seen or heard definitive proof of anyone else, but it was just that gut feeling, you know? We set up camp and made some food, then retreated to the tent. I handed my girl the 1911 and kept the judge right next to me. I assured her that if I slept at all, it would be with one eye wide open. After a while, she drifted off to sleep, and I stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the woods at night. I was awake for a few hours, just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point, though, I guess my exhaustion caught up with me, and I drifted off to sleep. I awoke a short time later to what sounded like someone going through our things outside the tent. I snatched up my gun and woke my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From the faint glow of the fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There really was someone out there. I called out to them, something along the lines of, "We're armed, get the fuck out of here!" They dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. Our stuff was strewn about everywhere. They had rummaged through quite a bit of it. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction of whoever was out there having fled. There was a creek nearby and I walked to the edge. There was a small trail running alongside it. Down that very same creek, I could see a light. It looked like a lantern from the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could. We were leaving now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent and a few other items, and headed back onto the trail in the middle of the night. I kept hearing people talking in the woods and hearing branches snap for quite some ways. I had to keep looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was sneaking up on us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something did happen, we were a long ways from anywhere, and quite literally all on our own. We hadn't seen a single other hiker the entire time we'd been out there. I really felt we were in some serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods behind us. As we rounded a corner, I turned around. I saw someone step out onto the trail and just stand there in the distance watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up. There was barely any light, so I couldn't make out their features, just their silhouette. I stopped and stared them down for a second. I asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently, watching us. Then they turned and walked back off into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We didn't see them again, but my gut told me they were still there for quite a ways after. We eventually reached the end of the trail and got to where we had parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic inbred hillbillies, which is what I had pictured happening in my head the whole time. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was somebody just messing with us. Maybe it really was a clan of deformed hillbillies who were hunting us. I'll never know, because I'll not be returning to find out. This happened to me several months ago during the summer. I had just graduated from high school, but I still didn't have my driver's license yet. I was just a teenage girl who was more focused on finishing my last year of high school than learning to drive anyway. My parents were out of town for the week, so I was supposed to be staying home to watch the house and pets. However, my friend and I had plans to have a sleepover and get smoothies the very day my parents left. I put on my favorite dress, gathered up my purse and my bus pass, and walked on over to the stop. I called my mom to tell her where I would be that night. She, of course, finished with, "Stay safe." With that, I hung up and made my way to the bus stop nearest to my house. After I boarded the bus, I sat in my seat quietly and texted my friend, very excited about the plans we had made together. The bus was crowded and sticky from the summer heat, but I was way too eager to care about anything like that. A few stops before the one I needed to get off at, a man entered the bus. The man was shaggy, messy, with whitish-gray hair and lots of stubble on his chin as well. He was wearing blue hospital scrubs. He shuffled onto the bus, dragging one foot slightly. He then stopped and made direct eye contact with me. It felt like an eternity, locked in a dead gaze with this strange man. Eventually, he looked away and made his way to the seat directly behind me. I just knew he was going to do that, the very second we locked eyes. He wasted no time at all putting his hands through the hole between the backrest and the metal bar that lined the head of my seat. His hands dangled behind my neck, and if I tried to lean back in my seat comfortably, I would have been right on them. I could feel his thick, heavy breath circling my neck and shoulders. At the very next stop, I flew out of my current seat and pretended to retrieve one of the bus route pamphlets directly behind the driver. I then sat down in the seat right behind them to escape this creepy man who was still watching me. I pretended to read over the pamphlet, trying not to seem as though I was trying to get away from him. But then, and I knew it was coming, the man moved closer to my new location at the next stop. I could feel his wide eyes boring into me. At this point, though, I had had enough of this song and dance. It was not my stop to get off yet, but I couldn't take this intense stare any longer. This close proximity was agonizing to me. I pulled the yellow cord to signal I wanted to get off. It was only one stop ahead of the one I needed to get off at anyway, so I didn't think it was too inconvenient. I would have only had to walk one more intersection anyway. As the bus driver pulled to a stop, I launched out of my seat and off the bus as fast as I could. And there it was, the feeling I knew would return. The feeling he would just so happen to get off with me. And he did. I walked quickly in the direction of my destination, with a prayer in my head. I had my phone in my hands the entire time, texting my friend. I dialed in 911, and I was ready to hit that call. Suddenly, I heard it. The sound of shuffling and feet scraping against the asphalt. I knew it was coming from the one leg that man dragged as he walked. I turned around, only to see him now sprinting at me. He had his arms out toward me and was working extra hard to pick up his limp left leg to catch up to me. His breathing was even more labored and raspy. I ran as fast as I could down that busy street. I was surprised that nobody seemed to notice a young girl being chased by a middle-aged man in a hospital dress. I ran into a nearby shop that sold skateboards and the like. As I burst in, out of breath and panting, the young man working at the register turned to me and asked, "Hi, how are you? Are you okay?" I answered very weakly. "I'm fine, I think, but I'm being chased. Can I please hide here until I can call my friend to come get me?" The man looked shocked at my response. My hands were shaking very hard. He led me over to the back of the store and sat me down. I explained what happened, and he waited with me as I called my friend. Some time passed before she got to me. The man from the bus was nowhere to be found, and we went home together. We were both terrified, looking over our shoulders for the rest of the way home. I still regret not calling the police. I used to work at Pizza Hut when I was in high school. I have a lot of bizarre stories from working there, but this is the one that scared me most. My Pizza Hut was the kind where you could only pick up the food. There was also a wall between the storefront and the kitchen, so if you were in the front of the store, you were pretty much on your own. The store itself was also located in a kind of out-of-the-way dead shopping center. Oh, and it was in Las Vegas too. That should tell you a whole lot about the level of our clientele. For whatever reason, I always seemed to get stuck on the late shift despite being in high school still. So on most weeknights by 10 at night, it would be just me and one other cook in the store, twiddling our thumbs mostly. I would hang out at the front. The cook was usually way at the back of the store out of earshot. One night, I was hanging out behind the counter when I saw this guy walk past. I didn't really think too much of it at first and went back to doing nothing while waiting there for my shift to end. Then though, the door to the store opened. I looked up and realized it was that very same guy who had just walked by. He was tall but also skeletally thin, and there was something not quite right about his eyes. Despite him putting me on edge though, I got up and greeted him and asked him what he'd like to order. Nothing. He just stood there in front of me, staring up at the ceiling and muttering to himself. I was only 17 at the time, and for the most part a good kid despite living in Sin City, so I really didn't know what to make of this situation. Now, knowing more, I would probably chalk it up to being on drugs. Anyway, he was still standing there, vacant expression, and muttering in what sounded like tongues. As abruptly as he had come in, he just spun around and walked right back out the store, not even acknowledging that I existed. I was unnerved, of course, but I shook it off and sat back down. It was getting toward the end of my shift, and I was counting down the minutes when I realized somebody had walked back into the store. I look up. It's the exact same guy. Same creepy eyes, only this time he's holding a phone up to his ear. He was muttering unintelligibly, and I realized he was not actually talking to anyone. Worse, he was staring right at me, super intense and unblinking. At this point, I was starting to get frightened. He would not stop staring at me. I tried to be polite once more and asked if I could help him with anything. He started to slowly walk toward the counter, still staring at me. Then, suddenly, he asked in a perfectly normal voice if his order was now ready. Mentally, I was thinking what the fuck at this point. I was not really sure how to answer when he'd never actually ordered anything. So, I went with the truth. I very tentatively pointed out to him that he'd never actually ordered anything when he came in the first time. He got this bug-eyed look on his face and lunged toward the counter. I jumped back at this point, and my heart was pounding. This guy was obviously not in the right state of mind. I was afraid he was going to pull out a knife or something and stab me. Just as abruptly as he lunged toward me and tried to grab me, he yelled, "God damn it!" He looked super confused and upset, like he was about to cry. He put his head into his hands and started pulling out his hair. I started to feel slightly bad at this point. I asked as nicely and calmly as I could if maybe he wanted to order something now. His head immediately snapped back up. His expression was now completely blank, and he looked completely deranged. I was now holding still. I was afraid even moving would set him off. Thankfully, though, the door to the store then opened, and a huge man walked in. He looked at this guy kind of confused, realizing something was not quite right with him. The crazy guy looked at him, then looked at me. Then he started backing up until he was out the door. He started walking toward the edge of the storefront, looking at me the entire time. Then he walked past the edge and was suddenly gone. The man who walked in looked at me and asked me what the hell that was. I looked at him and said I had no idea. I thought he was crazy. I tried to shake it off, but of course I was totally on edge for the rest of my shift. When I clocked out that night, I made one of the drivers walk out with me. Then I jumped in my car and got out of there as fast as possible. I never did see that dude again, but it was a really weird experience and very unnerving. I'm also not sure what he would have done if that other guy hadn't walked in when he did. I attend a college that's located in one of the poorest cities in Northern California. The campus is a relatively safe space, since the school employs its own Department of Public Safety. After the sun sets, though, it's usually a good call to remain indoors no matter what. That's when the townies come out and tend to wander onto campus. About 2 years ago, I was living in an apartment complex on the main part of campus, and I still didn't have a car yet. It was the end of the fall semester, and I was the last person in my apartment of 3 girls to finish taking finals. This meant I was home alone, since my roommates had already gone home for winter break. I got back from taking my very last exam, and followed my usual routine of dejectedly collapsing into bed to cry and sleep off the effects of pulling an all-nighter. When I finally woke up, it was already past 10 p.m., and I was starving. Unfortunately, the student grocery store and cafeteria were closed for the day. I had nothing to eat in the apartment, and no car to get food elsewhere either. I was woefully poking around in the fridge in the hopes I would find something substantial to tide me over until the morning, when I noticed a Domino's coupon someone had stuck to the freezer. My stomach's pathetic cries for sustenance had finally been answered. I very quickly decided there was no shame in ordering a whole pizza plus Santa sticks for myself, because 1, I was ravenous, 2, the completion of finals demanded some sort of celebration, and 3, if anyone happened to ask, I was going to lie and say I was sharing with my friends. Anyway, I eagerly ordered up my feast for 1 and provided the cashier with my address, apartment, and cell number. I typically never give out my number to anyone, but I had ordered delivery from Domino's in the past, and I knew they needed my number to call me once they were outside. Those drivers always got lost navigating through campus. About 20 minutes later, I got the call. My food was here. For reference, it was now very close to midnight, and the campus was pretty much dead since most other students had gone home. The driver told me he was parked in front of a dorm building that was right across the street from my apartment. I hustled out and was going down the stairs when I spotted the delivery guy waiting outside his car with my pizza. At this point, my sense of caution kicked in. I slowed my pace, as my brain took in the fact there were no other students around. The lighting was extremely bad in that area, and I was essentially walking right up to a stranger in his car that still had its engine running. As I neared the bottom of the steps, I silently hoped he would cross the street and approach me so I wouldn't have to get near his car. Of course, that didn't happen. I made my way across the street and was finally able to get a good look at him. He was a relatively short Hispanic guy, maybe 5'7" to 5'9". He was in his early 20s, and my nerves were immediately getting bombarded by the creeper vibes he was giving off. I could only compare it to the vibe that you get when you're out clubbing and you suddenly spot the guy lurking in the crowd sporting the slicked back ponytail, sunglasses, oversized shirt, and sag pants combo, who just so happens to be headed in your direction. I did my best to appear calm and keep the mood light and friendly. He made some comments about how late it was and how no one was around at all. I just signed the receipt as quickly as possible, gave him my thanks and an awkward smile, and hightailed it out of there. I could feel him watching my back as I climbed the stairs back to my place. Once I got back into my apartment, I locked and chained up the door and sat down on the living room couch to calm myself. After a few moments, I shrugged off the situation and reasoned that it was just my paranoia and overactive imagination acting up again. I had just turned on the TV and was about to take my first bite of pizza when I got a text from an unknown number. "You know, you're hella sexy." I connected the dots immediately. I matched the text number to the call I had received earlier from the pizza delivery guy. My initial reaction, of course, was shock, since nothing like that had ever happened to me before. That eventually melted away into laughter and disbelief, though, when I considered my appearance at the time. Like I had mentioned earlier, I had just woken up from my nap after taking the very last of my finals. I was wearing a raggedy pair of sweatpants, a loose sweatshirt, my hair was extremely nappy and tied in a messy ponytail, and my face was greasier than the pizza I was eating. To top it off, I had glasses on too. It was definitely not a pretty picture, much less anything that could come close to resembling hella sexy. The next morning, I got a call from my boyfriend John. I casually told him about this guy and the events that had transpired that previous morning. After sheepishly trying to defend my actions on the basis of poor judgment caused by extreme hunger and promising to never do that sort of thing again, John convinced me I should report it to campus police as a precautionary measure. I gave them a call and an officer stopped by my apartment a few hours later. I relayed my story. He took some pictures of the text message and wrote down the guy's phone number. The officer then told me he could contact the Domino's if I wanted him to, but it would most likely result in the guy's termination. I was still relatively unfazed by the whole situation. I told the officer I just wanted to make sure this creep never did this to any other girls on campus. At the same time, though, I didn't really want him to lose his job. The officer then started asking me questions about how I felt after my encounter. You know, did I feel threatened? Do I feel safe in my apartment with the knowledge he had my phone number and exact address? Well, if I wasn't scared before, I definitely was now, and during the course of my questioning, I broke out in a cold sweat. My traitorous imagination began conjuring up all sort of dastardly situations that all ended in my untimely demise. In the end, I ended up giving the officer the go-ahead to pursue my case and contact the Domino's. About a month later, while I was at home celebrating the holidays, I got a call from my boyfriend. You see, I had left him the keys to my apartment so he could store his bike there and crash in my room while I was away. He told me he had stopped by my place, but he couldn't get in because the keys weren't working. He also said it looked like someone had broken in because there was glass on the floor and a wooden board across my window. I was pretty upset, of course. This was my first time hearing about any of this. I called the school the next day to figure out what the hell happened. Housing transferred my call to the public safety department. The officer I spoke to was only able to tell me that according to their records, a maintenance worker had called them 2 days after I headed home to report my broken window. Public safety had responded by boarding it up and changing the lock when they noticed it had been tampered with. I convinced the officer to let my boyfriend into my apartment so he could check if anything was stolen. Thankfully, nothing was. My gut tells me it was the delivery guy who did it. It was him who tried to pick my lock and then broke my window. It scares me even more now when I consider the fact that nothing had been stolen. My flat-screen TV was right by the window that had been broken, and my boyfriend's fancy road bike was sitting right there in the living room. Why didn't he steal anything? Does that mean his intentions were to break in and get his revenge on me? The girl that had cost him his job. Would this still have happened if I had not given the officer permission to pursue the case? I try not to spend too much time speculating about what his true intentions were, but when I do, it still makes my heart race when I think about what could have happened had I still been in my apartment at that time. This happened a few years back when I was 12 or 13 years old. I'm from the Philippines for reference. It was Sunday afternoon, probably 5 to 6 o'clock, and I was at home with my dad. My mom had left to buy some groceries about 30 minutes ago using her only car. As I was watching videos on YouTube, the doorbell suddenly rang. It rang quite a few times until I'd finally had enough of it. That's when I knew I had to check who was there. Knowing my dad was probably sleeping in the other room, I reluctantly went downstairs to open the door. The thing is, I've dreaded opening the front door for people ever since my grandpa scolded me for opening the door for the mailman in his house. He always lectured me about how dangerous it could be, like I could be snatched up and kidnapped or something. With that thought, I climbed on the sofa, which was 3 feet away from the front door, and pulled the curtains to see who was ringing the doorbell. Note that the window I looked through was surrounded by a tall fence 4 to 5 feet away, so I felt perfectly safe. I found it convenient later on once I talked to him. He had a dark cap on and a blue jumper. He looked pretty normal to me, but also we weren't expecting anyone on this quiet Sunday. I asked the man what his business was, and he replied that he was supposed to deliver a pizza to my address. Excited and a bit confused, thinking my dad had secretly ordered pizza for us, I told him to wait for me to get my dad. I climbed upstairs to my parents' room and saw my dad was sleeping. I woke him up and asked him if he'd ordered a pizza. He replied in a daze that he had not. Disappointed, I went back downstairs to break the news to the delivery guy, who'd probably gotten the wrong address. When I got back to the window, though, he was long gone. Since I was pretty young back then, I really didn't think much of it until now. Today, I'm pretty certain I was almost kidnapped, though. 1, it was extremely quiet outside and my bedroom window was open. I didn't hear a motorcycle revving near the house, nor hear one when he left. 2, he just left like that even though I specifically told him to wait. I didn't even get to tell him that we hadn't ordered a pizza. 3, I didn't see a logo for the place he was working for either. The strange thing was that we only had 2 that were near us, and they both had a distinctive red color. My mom's theory is the guy probably thought I was home alone because our single car was gone, and my dad rarely got out of the house since he was unemployed back then. What probably got him to leave was when I told him to wait for me to get my dad. If not for my grandpa's scolding, I would have totally answered the door and probably not be here sharing this. So a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of western MD, and we were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop we had done pretty frequently. At this point, we decided to take some pictures and eat a snack at the summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches, tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and talking when I noticed a man just walking around in the parking lot alone. He was walking aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me though was that he was in jeans and a button-down shirt. Not exactly appropriate hiking attire. We decided to set off on the last 2-mile leg of that loop. This part goes downhill to the headquarters of the park and is cut out of the mountain/bank. The end of that leg is the parking lot where our car was. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail, and you have to walk in a single file. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turned around to look at her, only to see the same man right behind her, following at an extremely close distance. Immediately, I got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed he didn't have any pack or hiking gear and was not even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really spooked me. A bit more walking, and he continued to get even closer. I said to my friend that I had to tie my shoe as a reason to step off the trail and give him an opportunity to pass us by. Perhaps he was only following closely because he wanted to go faster than we were. She immediately caught on to what I was doing, and we pulled over to the side. He looked very startled. She waved hello and said hi politely. The man just stared at us. That's when I noticed he was carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, she stood between us, and he passed us by. We waited to give him some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slowed down. We waited for even longer. He got to the furthest part of the trail that had sightlines to us, and he turned around, stopping to look at us. Immediately, we knew something was too wrong about this guy. We didn't want to have to pass him by again. We turned around and walked back up the trail toward the park, with the picnic tables and parking. After a few minutes of walking back up the trail, I looked back, only to see him now following us again. I told my friend to walk even faster. We booked it up the trail and got to the parking lot area we were at before. We started to strategize and wait, deciding we would wait to see if he came all the way back up the trail to the lot. Thankfully, there were people around here, so we felt safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by and nothing. We were talking about how that could mean he had kept going on the trail and was long gone, or perhaps waiting where it was more deserted. We see a couple come up from the trail where we were, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction that we are. We approached them and asked if they'd seen anyone on the trail between this lot and the next. They told us they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They described the exact man who was following us. We explained our interaction with him to the wife and got into a conversation back and forth about whether or not he was a threat. The husband finally interjected. "We need to call a ranger right now. He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and he was carving that stick." Needless to say, we called the ranger. The nice couple walked that last leg with us to make sure we got to our car safely. Then they even gave us their numbers, just in case we needed anything. The rangers walked the trail, but there was no sight of the man. I wish I knew where he'd gone and what happened to him, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legitimate. I worked as a cocktail waitress when I was 22 years old. My shift was from 5 p.m. until 2 a.m. As a waitress, I'd become fairly used to being harassed. Usually, it wasn't anything too over the top or frightening though. Most customers were regulars who flirted innocently. Just good-natured banter, nothing threatening or in any way sinister at all. Up until this night, I'd never felt a sense of danger from any of the customers I'd waited on. On this particular night though, everything changed. I was being harassed by a creepy customer I'd never seen before. He'd said such inappropriate things to me that they really crept me out. He was relentless with them too. At one point, as I was serving his drink, he reached out and put his hand on my ass. After this happened, I never went back to his table again. If he wanted another drink, he'd have to go up to the bar and ask the bartender himself. I was through with waiting on this sinister creep. This happened back in 1978, so it was at a time when I didn't have any recourse when things like this happened. The bartender only made customers leave when they were far too drunk to sit on a bar stool or at a table or booth. Otherwise, we were left on our own to deal with these creepy customers. At closing, the man finally left. Even though he was gone though, I still felt such a sense of unease. I wasn't easily spooked, but this guy had really freaked me out for some reason. There was just something off about him. It took me nearly an hour after closing to complete the work and cleaning I had to do to have the bar ready for the following day. It was about 3 a.m. as I made my way through the dark parking lot to get back to my car. This was an extremely deserted and isolated place at night. The lot had woods that surrounded it entirely. That in and of itself was creepy. As I was about halfway to my car though, out of the very corner of my eye, I saw him. My heart began to pound as I realized he had waited in the lot for me the entire time to come out. I knew in that moment I had to get to the safety of my car, or this man was going to do God knows what to me. I was young and fit, thankfully, whereas this man was in his late 40s and overweight. My thoughts were quickly assessing my situation. I really didn't want to be kidnapped and murdered. This was the scenario I envisioned if this man got to me before I could get to my car. I knew I had to make a run for it, so I ran as fast as possible. I jumped inside the car and locked the door immediately. It wasn't one moment too soon either, because this man was now at my driver's side window, demanding I roll it down. He kept yelling he didn't want to hurt me. He only wanted to talk. He began to pound on my window as I fumbled with my keys to try and get the hell out of there. I began to fear he'd shatter my window entirely and get his hands on me. Finally, I got my car started. As I put my car into reverse and backed out, he began to scream bloody murder. He was yelling for me to stop, because apparently I'd run over his foot. My gut instinct, though, told me this man was faking the injury to get me out of my car. I was not going to get out for any reason. I drove home as fast as I could. Once home, I called the police. They came to take my report and get my description of the guy. At this point, I wasn't really certain about whether I had injured him or not. I explained all of this to the officer. The police sent another officer to the parking lot to see if he was still there and suffering from an injury. He wasn't there at all. Nobody called the police to report a hit and run either. The police told me I'd done the right thing by not falling for that ruse. I called my boss the following day and told him I would not be returning to work there. I'd never been so frightened by anyone before. It was a night in which I truly feared for my life. There was no way I could make myself return to that job. That night still haunts my dreams. In 2011, I was a sophomore in high school and was hanging out with my friend Hadley. We live in the Rust Belt, and the population of our area has declined a lot in the last 40 to 50 years. As a result of this, schools were merged due to declining enrollment, which meant there were a lot of abandoned schools around. I lived in a small town on the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, and the abandoned school was a hot spot for teenagers. They either wanted to smoke weed and break windows, or just overall cause some havoc. My friend and I were in a breezeway type area. You could just step right in over a 1.5-foot wall because all the glass had been long since smashed out. All of a sudden, though, a guy comes around the corner and grabs my friend, telling her to come with him right now. At the time, we thought it was a guy who intended to call the cops on us, so we booked it the fuck out of there. We walked over to my cousin's house down the street. It was the day before my aunt's birthday. It was also a supermoon that day as well. This meant that all my family was at my cousin's house. We hung out with them for a bit. They all ended up going out to eat, but my cousin, Hadley, and I stayed back at the house. It was now really dark outside. We were just sitting there on my cousin's stoop, smoking cigarettes and minding our own business, when all of a sudden we see a man walking down my cousin's driveway from the direction of her garage, not the direction of the street. The man immediately pulled his coat over his mouth once he saw us, and pulled his hat down to his eyes as well. Only his eyes and nose were now visible, and he was making a strange gesture at us. At first glance, I thought he was jangling keys or something. My dumbass thought our uncle was trying to give us the house keys. I walked right up to the man. All of a sudden, my cousin shouted, "Jake, get the fuck away from him!" Now that I was a little bit closer, I could see what he was really doing, masturbating. We turned around and ran around the house to the front door. The door to the stoop was literally never ever used and was blocked by a bunch of shit because it opened to a storage room. Thankfully, we managed to get inside without problem. The man arrived at the front door shortly after us and finished all over the sliding glass door. He then ran back towards our garage into the woods. Now we were freaking the fuck out. We called the cops, they asked us some questions, and then they left. About a week later, a girl who had graduated from our high school heard about what happened. and remembered seeing a car parked on the street behind my cousin's garage at one point in time. She found it suspicious, so she had taken down the license plate number. She reported that number to the police. It was registered to an Ohio man, so not much could be done on our side. A few weeks later, though, this same car chased a woman home from Walmart in Youngstown, Ohio, and attempted to break inside and mirror her. Needless to say, he was arrested. Turns out he had a habit of trying to sexually assault people in Walmart parking lots in both Newcastle, Pennsylvania and Youngstown, Ohio. He faced charges now in both states, and my cousin, friend, and I were all subpoenaed to testify against him. When we got to court, we saw his mugshot. The guy who had masturbated and chased us was the same guy who had grabbed my friend at the abandoned school. He wasn't going to call the cops that time. He was going to try to grab her and do God knows what. In the end, he got a few years in prison, but I believe he got out in 2015 or 2016. "4 years ago, when I was 17 years old, my best friend Hannah, also 17, came over to my house for the weekend. I believe it was a Saturday night when this happened. We had stayed up very late, as teenagers at a sleepover want to do. Ate some junk food, watched some movies together. It was around 1 a.m. when I decided to take a shower and then head to bed. After our horror movie marathon, I was pretty paranoid, so I asked Hannah to sit in the bathroom with me while I showered. She accepted and did just that. She sat down on the toilet and started playing some music on her cell phone. We talked about whatever we had going on in our lives while I showered. Finally, after probably 20 minutes or so in the shower, I got out and grabbed a towel. Hannah was still sitting on the toilet, and she said my name. I turned to face her. That's when I noticed some movement in the bathroom window just above her head. The window cling distorted it slightly, but I knew immediately what I was looking at. A face. A man's face, smirking at me from the other side of the glass. The man ducked out of view instantly once he saw I'd noticed him. I quickly faced away, wrapping the towel around me tight. I whispered to Hannah that there was a man looking into the window. She laughed, thinking I was messing with her, so she bravely stood up, and to her horror, came face to face with this creep, now staring at her and smirking as well. We ran out of the bathroom and woke my parents. But of course, the creepy dude was already gone by the time my dad got outside. That man better be glad for that. The next day, my parents investigated outside the window. There was a cinder block propped underneath it that the man had apparently been standing on, indicating this probably wasn't the first time he'd peeped on me. Stuffed in between that block and the wall, a big bag of lotion. The window cling was useless, as you could see everything inside the bathroom clearly from the outside. We didn't know that at the time, though. Now, I still can't shower without having the bathroom windows covered. So, 23-year-old guy here. I live in a pretty safe neighborhood and usually always lock my doors. Last night, though, I apparently forgot to. It was not too long after I had just taken my dogs out for the last time. I was turning off the TV and lights when one of my dogs suddenly started growling. That wasn't too weird, I guess. He sometimes did that whenever people would walk by the house. He would also only do it to certain people as well and not everyone. Then, though, I heard the distinct sound of the front door opening and someone walking inside. My dog then started barking like crazy. My other dog, who loves all people, came running from the other room to greet our mysterious guest. At the very same time as all this was happening, I was reacting as well. "What the fuck? Who are you?" Standing in the hall was a man in his mid to late 20s. He was skinny and extremely tall.
"Oh, I don't think I'm in the right place."
He seemed genuinely confused. "Hell no you aren't. Get the fuck out." The man apologized profusely and said he had only been coming to hang out with a friend. and just sort of accidentally wandered into the wrong place. I asked the man what house he had originally been looking for. He said a number that was just a couple of numbers off from mine. He apologized again and left immediately. The man seemed pretty nice and non-threatening, but of course I was still spooked no matter what. In the morning, I was ready to just laugh the entire thing off as a drunken mistake or something. I was planning on telling my neighbor, a couple in their 30s, what had happened. I didn't know them all too well, but we had talked here and there occasionally. Luckily, I managed to just catch one of them when I was taking my dogs out. I didn't really want to come off like I was mad or scared over what happened, so I casually brought it up to them. You know, I'm sure he told you about it, but your friend gave me quite a surprise visit last night. My neighbor gave me this extremely confused look. What are you talking about? Your friend, he walked into my house last night thinking it was your place. My neighbor was very quiet for a second. I don't want to alarm you, but I have no idea what you're talking about. We didn't have any friends over last night. We didn't invite anybody either. To start off with, I'm a hunter, and I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to bag a turkey or two for Thanksgiving, I mostly tend to hunt boars. For those of you who might not know, boar are a huge problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Well, given that pigs eat and kill anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In fact, in my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night vision or thermal scopes, with the exception of boar and coyotes. I'd been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that cost literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it to was worth it. Still though, I did it, and I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity, and I knew it would be the perfect place for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy-to-find spots that I could set up in, which overlooked an easy-to-navigate clearing. The night started out pretty uneventfully, mostly me just tinkering with my new toy, cycling through all the fancy settings. I was getting a little bit impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup was not legal for hunting deer. I moved over to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably would not be much better than my first. Still though, at the very least, it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot didn't seem to have much animal activity at all. No rabbits or owls. That deer I'd seen was hundreds of yards away from where I was. Why exactly was this particular pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the daytime? I'd set up at around 10 p.m. It was around 2 a.m. when I was finally thinking about packing up. Maybe I'd set up a target before I left and take some practice shots or something so it wasn't a waste. I heard a crunch come from the direction I'd come from before in that moment. Instantly, I panned my scope over, only to see a silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kinda like a black and white version of what you might see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little bit. I remember jolting a bit when I saw that it wasn't actually a bear. I was looking at a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I had thought I was looking at a young bear at first. Was that a game warden, perhaps? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched at. And where could he have walked in from? It was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed that this man was naked. No shoes, pants, socks, not a single thing covering him. I remember being very disturbed by his movements as well, like a strange squirrel or something, very twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the trees. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? For a moment, a terrified thought occurred to me. Could this man smell me somehow? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. The man suddenly squatted, placed both his hands in the dirt between his feet, and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. I heard something, a voice coming from that direction as well, a very compelling female voice. "Help! I'm lost!" It was a long pause, but neither of us moved a single muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. That went against everything I'd ever been taught about firearm safety. Were they lost? Was this some guy who had gone crazy out there? Why was his voice so feminine now? "Help! Please! I can't walk!" The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk just fine, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. Obviously, this was a trap. This guy was trying to lure me to him with this damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I may have left a hat and a sitting pad behind or something, but who gives a shit about that in this kind of moment? I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but now he turned directly to face my direction. I swear I saw him smile. The thermal scope having an effect that made his eyes appear pure white. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have been 150 yards away. "Hey, fuck off!" I screamed in that direction. The man stood upright immediately, and it hit me just how tall and skinny he was. He was 6 feet tall and extremely lean. The man took a couple of long strides in my direction. Instinctively, I fired a warning shot above his head into the tree line. The man was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me or done anything really. What would I tell the cops if I was to call them? And it's not like I was standing here willing and ready to shoot someone in the forest. The man stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "I promise you, the next one will fuck you up. Go away!" He stayed on all fours. This time, I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling. I knew my voice had cracked a bit on that last warning. I was completely terrified. That standoff only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like an eternity. In an instant, he bolted left toward the tree line opposite the road. Well, so much for not being able to walk, I guess. I could barely keep him within my scope's sights as he was moving too fast. He disappeared into the brush. I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one. I dropped it and didn't even bother looking though. At this point, I wasn't far away from my truck, and I just wanted to leave this place. I could now hear the man off in the distance, yelling this weird sound that could have been something between a laugh and a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck completely breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab and kept my rifle in the passenger seat. I sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman hermit. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting alone at night. I never really received an update. I told my nephew as well at a camping trip. My story scared the piss out of him, because the spot we were camping was technically the very same forest I'd seen that bastard before, just 50 miles east of it. He got so spooked his mom had to take him home. She was actually really pissed at me. I've gone down the rabbit hole on these scary stories, and I am generally a skeptic. I'm not saying what I saw was definitely like a Wendigo or a skinwalker or something like that. I'm saying that if such a thing does exist, it would be exactly like that guy was that night. All I know is that I dodged a hell of a bullet. Maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, I thought you guys might like this one. So today has been a particularly slow day at work, and I've been killing time listening to stories. Maybe enough time has passed that I can finally share my own. Back in the day, I used to have this friend who was really into the occult. Unfortunately, I was the one who got him turned on to it. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal and all things weird, so I thought the subject would really interest him. He started going real deep into the subject though, to the point where he refused to talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt conversations and always force the subject back to occult matters. It was rude, but I thought at the time sometimes people can go through phases where their interest is all they really want to talk about, you know? It's a mostly forgivable offense. I think I should mention also that this particular friend did not have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside quite a lot. He also didn't have the best of luck in relationships with women. His whole world was just kind of small. I did enjoy hanging out with him, so I did my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to just brush him off because he was acting a little bit weirder than usual. Honestly, for the longest time, he was a totally normal guy. We'd chat and play games together on PlayStation. We'd go to movies together with my boyfriend accompanying us, and we all hung out at the park together. We even went swimming, and overall just had a good time spending time together. Things really started to go downhill when he started to smoke DMT. Personally, I think psychedelics are amazing tools that can offer insight into your life, but they are still a drug, and they should be treated with respect. My friend eventually got to the point where he was making the stuff himself and smoking it almost daily, sometimes multiple times a day. For those of you who aren't familiar with this particular substance, when you smoke it, you get transported to an entirely different world, a new plane of existence. Your body and self don't exist anymore. You're just kind of exploring this alternate reality dreamscape. My personal experience with it led me to seeing a dragon once in this kaleidoscope of a cornucopia. People see all kinds of things when they're there. Now imagine what that does to a person when they're doing it 30 plus times in a day sometimes. He started to get real bad delusions, started telling me things like he was the reincarnated Osiris. He was seeing Egyptian hieroglyphs all over the place in waking life. He would have hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom, even when he was no longer smoking DMT. Of course, I was very alarmed to hear all of this. I told him he really needed to take a serious break. No drugs at all for a few months, until he could find his solid footing in reality once again. At this point, I was still hanging out with him, because very obviously he needed some help. Like I said before, he didn't have a lot of support that could give him that. Because of everything that had gone down, he was the black sheep of the family as well, so I knew he wouldn't get any support from them either. He was at least really close to his sister. I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk him into getting some psychiatric help, because he was very quickly slipping past the point of no return. Unfortunately, I'm not really sure if she took my messages very seriously. We didn't really know each other at all. Plus, she was at least 6 years younger than us, and possibly didn't grasp how serious the situation was. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part where things started to get real creepy. My boyfriend had made some arrangements to hang out with our friend at the park. I didn't really want to go because I felt like I needed a break from him and his nonsensical ranting. I just couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend, though, said he wasn't all that bad this day, so we went anyway. We got to the park and he was his usual self, ranting about Egypt and made-up gods that only he knew the truth about. He had this large hunting knife that he kept fiddling with the whole time we were on a walk. He then told us he had been practicing ceremonial magic with it, and it helped him to banish negative thoughts. This made me extremely uneasy. He would keep doing this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions near his heart and head, like he was mock-stabbing himself, way too close for comfort. All while holding a conversation with me and my boyfriend. We were both starting to get real on edge, but we didn't know how to say something or do anything about it. I tried to distract him by bringing up other subjects I thought might interest him, but he kept on going right back to this ritual. Keep in mind, we were walking on a trail, so it wasn't like we could just say goodbye then and there. We had to walk back to our car and drop him off at his. Well, my boyfriend had the bright idea to get some lunch together after our walk, even though I was doing my very best to give him a look that said, "No, you crazy fuck, why do you think I want to spend any more time with this damn nut?" I guess it must not have been very effective. Either that or my boyfriend was ignoring it. Not really sure. Either way, we ended up piling into the car together. I was driving, my boyfriend was in the passenger seat, and our weirdo friend was in the back. As we're heading through a busy part of town, where all the shopping and restaurants are, I hear the distinctive sound of a belt buckle coming undone. Then I heard the worst sound imaginable. I peeked back out of the corner of my eye, and my suspicions were confirmed. This crazy fucker was full-on jacking off in our back seat. I mean pants all the way down, bare ass on the seat, beating it so hard it looked like he was about to rip it off entirely. Instantly, I felt sick to my stomach. All the nervous energy I had throughout the day popped into my head. I tried to ignore this as I drove through the heavy traffic. I kinda had a freeze response, I guess. The whole time I kept thinking about that huge-ass knife he had on him, and how obviously he was completely off the rocker now. I was afraid to say anything or confront him. I didn't know how he was going to react. As impossibly crazy as this sounds, my boyfriend didn't seem to notice at all. The entire time he was rambling on about God knows what. I couldn't listen though because my thoughts were now 100% focused on driving and not getting stabbed from the back seat. When we got to the restaurant, my boyfriend ran inside to grab some food. I was left all alone in the car with our friend. I tried to act like I was browsing on my phone, when in reality I was watching and listening him as hard as I could. Neither of us said a word. My boyfriend arrived back and I complained that I was tired. Let's just drop our friend off at home. I drive us back to our friend's car. He doesn't get out of our vehicle. He just kinda sits there, like he's been turned off or something. At this point, I had to get a little bit rude. I asked him to please get out and go home. He got out and walked over to his passenger side. He pulled a gun out of some kind of bag he had on the seat and walked over to our car with it. I don't know why the fuck I did this, but I was so pissed I got out of my car and walked right up to him. I could see he was now holding a loaded 9mm. I kept on asking him over and over what he was going to do with that, because apparently that's all my brain could think to do. I told him to hop in his car and go home. He'd not said a single thing during this entire time. He just kinda cried and had this really wild look in his eye. For whatever reason, he got back into his car and drove off. I told my boyfriend obviously we were never hanging out with him again. I didn't even want to talk to him anymore. No contact, nothing. A few months passed by and he would occasionally message me through PlayStation or texts on my phone. It was a lot of random stuff getting even crazier and crazier. I just tried to ignore it. Turned out he had moved down to Tennessee near Nashville. I don't really know why. He had a roommate and I think their girlfriend lived there as well. I'm not really sure about the situation. At this point, I thought perhaps he was turning his life around finally, getting a fresh start down there. I thought it was best to cut all contact and just let him regroup. I was not really interested in any kind of friendship, and I know he needed help far beyond what I could ever offer. Again, I reached out to his sister and let her know he had a gun now as well. She managed to get him to hand it over somehow. Not that it did very much good in the end. I got a call around 11 p.m. one night that woke me up. It was a man claiming he was a detective down in Gallatin, Tennessee. My heart skipped a beat. I started sweating and immediately asked what had happened. Apparently, my former friend had stabbed someone to death on Halloween Day. I don't know all the details. The whole thing was very surreal. I was just left feeling I was very lucky I didn't get shot that day last summer. This all turned out way longer than I meant it to be, but that's the entire story. I'm still feeling creeped out by the whole ordeal and kind of feeling sick after writing all of this. In February of 2012, I went to visit my grandfather's grave for his birthday. His death had been a really hard thing for me to deal with, as he had died in March of 2011, and it was still very fresh in my mind. I was kneeling in front of his grave with my head down, mourning and crying, when my body suddenly went into full danger is close mode. I looked up, only to see a man running in full sprint out of the woods surrounding the cemetery. I forced myself up and ran to my truck as quickly as possible without the man getting close to me. By the time I had made it, he had already gotten about 50 feet away from me. I jumped in and locked the door immediately, much to his very visible displeasure. He threw his hands up in a huff, like his favorite sports team had just lost a football game or something. I started up my truck and started to drive out as fast as I could, but not before driving right past that man. I didn't break eye contact for a second, and neither did he. I got a really good look at his face. Cut now to a few years later. I'm at work bored when I decided to download an app that had a ton of paranormal, cryptid, serial killer, and UFO articles. As I was browsing through the serial killer section, I came across one that made my heart drop into my ass. Israel Keyes, most known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her body, and dropping the pieces into a frozen lake. He would bury kill kits in places long before he ever committed crimes there. Apparently, after the incident in Alaska, he had traveled into Texas for a wedding in a city not too far from where I live, and had disappeared for a bit. No one in his family knew where he was. He was arrested in that very same city and brought to the prison one city over from me. Then he was extradited back to Alaska to stand trial. About a year ago, I found a book about him that provided a lot of the details I've given here. He had been killing for years, and no one knows what his actual death toll is. He eventually killed himself in prison. At the end of the book about him, he describes some of his favorite places to abduct people: public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if there's a kit buried out in those woods somewhere. He was fast, but luckily I was faster that day, and I'm glad we didn't have the chance to officially meet.